Hello guys, this is Gabriel Falling from Team SK Gaming.
Okay, it's time for another episode of Reflections. And with this being the 100th episode of Reflections, my guest is Thorin, longtime esports journalist, also known as the esports historian. That's the moniker that he goes by. So let's just start there. Why the esports historian? Like, what is the special significance of history? Why not just be esports journalist? Why not be esports analyst? Why not be esports expert? Whatever title you might choose. Why the esports historian? Well, even if I didn't always know it, I've always been intrigued by the historical context of esports. That's something where I didn't necessarily consciously pick up on it in the early days, because, think about it, in the very early days of esports, I was there right at the beginning of the history. There wasn't much history. There wasn't a lot of past tournaments. There wasn't a lot of stuff to refer back to. And so I sort of got to see it develop and then saw that as more and more history passed and more tournaments and the careers of players extended. Even we're talking in the first couple of years I was involved in esports. What I found was, yes, initially you're drawn in because you like to play the game. Initially you're drawn in because some of those players play at a very high level, or they do incredible things in the game that are compelling or that make you feel astonishment, make you feel a sense of awe. But then actually I found that that's magnified. The significance and the context of that becomes even more important when you understand what they did before and where they came from and where they are in their career trajectory and where they are relative to who they just beat or who they lost. These things all together add in an extra layer of significance to the plays that you see on an everyday basis or in a specific tournament match. And so it enhances that in the same way as if you follow a sport, yes, to watch the match, that should be the meat of the meal, that should be the thing that sustains you, the reason why you come to do it. There should be that component, but knowing more about it, knowing the team, knowing the style, knowing what they're trying to accomplish, knowing who they're playing against as their peers, then who their peers are in history and what they're trying to accomplish in the context of everything that's been done before and has yet to be done. This will enhance it. This will add an extra component that humans, particularly if we look at how they interact with stories and with myths and with archetypes and all these this terminology we've built up around it to explain and to model what's going on here within the human mind, it's clear that this is how you make what otherwise could be boiled down to very simple: someone kicking a ball into a net, someone jumping up really high and putting a ball over someone else through a different type of a net, someone punching someone in a specific way. These can be boiled down to very simplistic, almost mechanical space-time interactions or events. But that is really to strip them of all the significance. Why do they matter to me? Why do they matter to you if you watch these games? Because you know how hard it is to do that, or you know how key the timing was, or you know how chaotic that interaction was and how crazy it was that one came out and actually that was luck or it was happenstance or some bizarre set of circumstances of one person going one way while another goes another way and they could never quite know, and this unconscious dance between them produces something incredible, in the same way as you see those flocks of birds that can't consciously each know what the other's going to do and which direction they're going to turn, but simultaneously and in a synchronized fashion they turn in a swarm and they go to a different way. It's incredible when you see it, and it has that extra significance that to the bird it doesn't have. The bird isn't thinking that way. It doesn't see anything majestic about it. But you get that music and you put like that one of my favorite albums, actually, the soundtrack to that movie about flamingos that the cinematic orchestra did, put some of that soaring orchestral music behind it as you see the birds shift direction. This will evoke within you some sense of awe, some sense of magnificence about life, about what's possible, about the world we live in, interacting with the ideas within the realm of the imagination, as it were. So over time, I've come to the conclusion that these are the things that hooked me in, etc. And this is one of the reasons why I wasn't the historian early on. Yeah, I was interested in it. It was always a focal point of my work. But it was on a very simpler level in the early days. It was that I wanted to know who the best was. And then I wanted to know, okay, if they're the best, who was the best and how do they match up? And can that guy ever come back and battle him? And what if he was, as you do in every great sport, the people who are the most interested in it always want to shadow box. You want to go, right, what if we took this great champion from the past and let him play now? What would happen now? How does he match up in that sense? You want to know also, when the next generation comes along who are the good players and potentially the great players, what do they have to do to live up to being the great player or becoming the greatest player, and what hasn't been done yet? Therefore, what can they do to go beyond that, to do something new that even those people never imagined and never were able to do? So this is a way to give significance and meaning, not just to life, but to esports and to games and to competitive disciplines as themselves. And this is one of those areas where you can only know in reflection, looking back on your life, why things are that way or how they came to be that way. And if I look back in my life, obviously I never planned to be a journalist. I never planned to go into any sort of creative field in this respect. I actually at one point in time planned to be a computer programmer. So I was getting a very different kind of sciences approach. But if I go and I look back when I was a boy, one of the first things that really drew me in, because when you're a child, a lot of the books that they give you to read are very simplistic. And unfortunately, especially by the time you get to like the late 80s, early 90s, when I was still young, a lot of these books at that point being written purposely for children. And when you write something for children in that way, you don't just write a great story which would appeal to children, which is actually kind of the way I saw a lot of it in like the 70s and the early 80s in terms of how people did a lot of work. As a sidebar, because a lot of those guys wanted to be real fiction writers or they wanted to do something incredibly creative, but the only paying work they could get is very low paying work doing stuff like writing children's books, writing comic books. So they put in all their creative efforts to that and they tried to do something incredible beyond the genre. That's lost to some degree when it becomes more commercialized and it's almost done to order. But as a result, in the ambience of that, in that sort of an atmosphere, when I first encountered myths, like Norse myths particularly, because the key thing I noticed is the Norse myths, the Roman myths, and the Greek myths, the ones that really drew me in, they had this like historical nature to them, and yet clearly they actually understood the mythological element in as much as they're clearly not of history. Like, I don't know whether people who were Greek and people who were Norse actually really thought these things happened, but I would hope on some level that the people telling the story, they can see that there's a level where it wasn't supposed to have actually happened. It's supposed to be within an imaginal realm that looks similar to our world and has lots of similar components, but it's not really tied to a time or a place or the idea that this has to have actually happened and that that's the key initial bedrock of why this matters as a story. No, it matters as a story because of what plays out, the psychodrama of what happens in this particular story, and then the significance to the history of the world, to how things are in life, to what happens in your own personal life on that lower level, take it to a Joycean kind of an angle in that particular respect. So I was very much drawn to these in the early years. And also, one of the things I liked about those myths, in contrast to children's stories, is in children's stories, when they have a moment of darkness or a negative element introduced, often it's done in a very moralizing manner where they're trying to teach children, like, this is how you should think, and this is bad, and this is good, which, I mean, okay, to some degree, some of that, it's probably needed within a story to some degree, but I always felt like they were too manipulative there. It made it just too clear as to what you were supposed to think and what you were allowed to think, and essentially you can't think, oh, well, this bad guy's the good guy, and then continue on in the story. It won't work the same way. The mechanisms of the story break down. Whereas what I liked about the myths is, first of all, there's a lot of people here who have really grey, like, moral centers, motivations. Sometimes they're the villain or the anti-hero or the antagonist, but then sometimes they help out the person who's the protagonist and seemingly the hero. Sometimes the hero does something that actually, viewed from a different time and age, he seems like the one who's behaved unfairly or in an immoral manner, where sometimes there's honor in how the person who's set as the antagonist as the villain behaved. So I loved that aspect, the fact that there was a very wide spectrum of behavior for how these people did things and their motivations. It's not that they made sense, it's that they had their own coherency. They were consistent to who the character was supposed to be. And as such, one element, and this is where you see why they're mythological, and clearly they're not really supposed to be taken on any literal kind of a level. As, by the way, I think actually all the core tenets and basis for religions and philosophies are in general, just that they've taken a branch of philosophy, called it religion, decided it was all literal, all really happened, and then people are living out an irrational life by acting as though that's what they have to impose over their everyday reality. But one of the things I always liked was they could have a really heartbreaking, really unfair, really tragic component in those myths. Because guess what? That's what life can be like. That's what anything can be like. And even in the imaginal realm, there's a reality to that, in as much as you can feel that, yeah, that is kind of how things can go. That is the way things are. Sometimes things don't make sense. Sometimes things don't fit the way we'd like a neat storyline to go, or the way we wanted the story to end. You don't get the happy ending. So those always were present there. And these are things I've seen in esports. And now when I relate it back, I can see the similar scenarios. I mean, when a player plays fantastically, we don't just say, right, he's playing even better, he's a very good player. No, what terminology we start using? Oh, he's a god, he's magnificent. Look at how incredible, how spectacular he is. He does things that defy belief. That's impossible. We go and we reach right out to all these superlatives, and we don't just do it because we're hyping the person up. We do it because in those moments he does seem to represent something more refined, more pure than what he is just as a player and just as an average guy. And he links into something bigger. And that's one of the things that is compelling, that gets us excited. And for that moment when he's doing something incredible, we're kind of there with him. Now, not in the same way, we're not even experiencing it in the same way, but we're there inside our imaginations in some sort of a realm where more things are possible and incredible things are possible. And in that moment, that's why they always use that comment, it's electrifying, which is kind of cliched because it's just been used too much. I would just say it's incredibly potent as a moment. When someone's in the middle in Counter-Strike, they've done 2 incredible kills, and then the guy comes out and he spots him, and you just know before it's even happened, if he kills him, it has to be something incredible. And in that moment, even though in most scenarios you should analyze it and go, right, the other guy's got the jump on him, we should probably kill him here. He's already taken damage from the other people before. This other person knows his location. He should probably die now. And when he swings, if he does miss, why don't you just go, oh, well, that's what I expect to happen anyway? No, because in that moment, it's so potent a moment that in that instance, you do remove the limitations of what normally would be the case. And because they've elevated their play and they're doing something incredible, you think it is going to happen. You want it to happen. You're waiting for it to happen. And when it happens, there's euphoria, there's elation that you wouldn't have otherwise if it was just an everyday moment. So I did start to see over my career, but if I go back and I look at the roots of it, some of these things were always present, I think, ultimately. Then you've got to add in some of the kind of environmental factors that made me as a person into who I became as an adult. I mean, I actually started working in esports when I was about 17 or 18, so I was like a young adult, well, definitely wasn't a man in terms of the mature sense, but I was becoming a legal adult, and I have to say, because the mid-90s, when the internet was really getting going, etc., I was around then, and I started to play Quake when it came out, and I played it on LAN sometimes, and I could every now and then play the few online games. I have to say, the fact that I couldn't fully be on the internet all the time, didn't have my own internet connection, I had to use other internet connections, I had to go to LAN cafes, etc. The fact that because I didn't have an internet connection all the time, I couldn't play Quake all the time. I'd read all these articles about it, I'd play the odd game, and never be able to get to the level of some of the people who played all the time. It cost a lot to go on the internet back then when you had to use a dial-up modem. Because of all these factors, I've always felt like I had what I call younger brother syndrome. Even though I'm not the younger brother, but I was in this respect that I couldn't have, it wasn't my thing, it wasn't my console, it wasn't my time where I could have all the goes, where I could be the person who was in charge of it, like a younger brother might be when the older brother has the console and the games and the PC and the internet connection and all these things. I've always felt like if you're that person, the younger brother in that respect, it makes you value that thing more highly because it's so scarce, because you get a taste of it, because you try it, because you see someone else doing it and it looks so fun and so awesome and you want it so badly, but you don't have access to it yet. And I've always felt like that kind of a person, especially when they're a very driven, kind of an obsessive person like that, when they do get that thing and they can fully kind of have their way and give it as much as they want and go as ham as they want, that kind of person I notice tends to become the most dedicated to that thing, because on some level it's still kind of lurking back there, the days when it was scarce and when they didn't have it and when that's all they wanted to do in the world but they couldn't. And so I think you look at some of the great players in history. I mean, for Counter-Strike, I could give you a few great examples, like some from other games. So in Counter-Strike, a great example would be Neo. Anyone who knows his history knows this is a guy who was playing Counter-Strike when he was like 12 or something. There's even some story about how his parents like helped him out with some sort of like started like a LAN center business or something so he could play more and play proper matches and play competitively. So this is a guy where he was the kid, and then finally he's getting a chance, and then he's getting older so he can go to LANs, and now he's got a chance to play more and he can go into the best teams, and he's got some support from his family and his father particularly. It's a shame this story's never come out in the West. His father's actually a pretty inspirational guy. He's a pretty cool guy actually if you get to know him. And I actually think that this is why he goes on to become the greatest player ever. Now, yes, if he didn't have the talent, if he didn't dedicate himself as much, if he hadn't have just happened to be who he is, so that when he refined his skills, he was the best, it wouldn't have happened for him. But it's obvious to me as to why this guy had the chance to be. I always kind of said that the person who'll become the greatest Counter-Strike player, this is something a conclusion I came to a long time before Neo became the best, was I always thought the person who'll be the best is the guy who starts in Counter-Strike as his first big game. So he starts real young, so he gets the maximum chance to put in lots of years even before he becomes a pro. And then when he becomes a pro, he's the guy where, because he was almost like Neo in the Matrix, okay? He was like born in the Matrix, he was part of the Matrix, everything about it occupied him, and then he had to gradually become the one, as it were.
That's the guy who'll stick with it and who'll put in the dedication and who won't just get to the top and then mess around with his talent, etc., like some of the others out there did, or he won't be too old and therefore only get a few games at the top. Someone like Neo had the best chance, the best big run at it. Now, he didn't in as much of the environmental components that he came from Poland, which is a country that had no relevance in esports when he came up, especially not in Counter-Strike and team esports, and he was in a very difficult situation to get sponsors. Now, yes, he had to be the best and push his way past those limitations. You'd have expected it to be a Swedish person or a Norwegian person or someone from Germany, places that had a base of esports and a history and a scene already and top teams and a hierarchy that you could climb up through. Yeah, you would have expected that. And that's where obviously the 1 in a million component comes in, where it's the guy you can't find the needle in the haystack. You never know who that guy's going to be. They just emerge out of nowhere, and they don't have to emerge, and they could not have, and we could have had all these great players, but if they do, they stand above all, and they are the faker of their game, the Michael Jordan of the game, whatever it is it might be. So another example is GeT_RiGhT to me. If you go back and read the stories, okay, GeT_RiGhT was around when Quake and stuff was going on, but he wasn't there to play the game, and he was too young, and he was just a young guy. So when he got going with Counter-Strike, and especially because of the hardships he endured in his early days, this is a guy where he actually never did think he was going to be the best necessarily, and never was going to get the fast track to the top teams like some of the other guys like Forrest, etc. did once their talent became known. Zet, Heaton, these guys got fast tracked through the scene when people saw how talented they were. Someone like GeT_RiGhT, I mean, he really was just a guy with good spray, and he had some good skills, and he had some good demos, and people made early movies of him, but he wasn't in the top team. He didn't have the charisma and the personality that attracts people itself, so he was just a good player among other good players and among rising stars. As many players at that time could have gone on to be that. There was Gux, there was Face, there was these other guys later, Delpan, Modi. These guys were all around that scene, and they were all playing, and they were all, a much of everything, a much of nothing. Like, there's just a whole bunch of them, and they all have slightly different qualities, but they haven't developed their games, and they haven't developed their identities yet, so we don't know who they are and how they fit in these teams. But when he got into those top teams, when he got into Fnatic, and he really started rolling, he has never let up since. This guy legitimately put in, like, let's see, it's got to be like 6 years of like high level play in which he was incredibly dedicated. Over that span, no one was more dedicated than him. No one put in more hours. No one worked on their game more. No one was willing to go more tournaments and battle more and put up with teammates and all their problems and even personal illnesses that would have set other people back. No one. And I think that's part of it, is that he had that same love for it, that same drive to even want to play the game itself. I mean, another example that you could give would be Froggen in League of Legends is like this. Froggen is a guy where if you ever go back and hear the stories, apparently it's his brother that was playing League of Legends first. And then his brother, I think, even used to play Anivia as well, like the classic champion of Froggen. And so Froggen started off, as far as I can tell, just thinking like League of Legends is Anivia, just wanted to play Anivia every game he could and do this as much as he could. And then he's playing the game a lot. He's the younger brother. He becomes a pro. And it wasn't until, we're talking like late 2014, that any kind of extracurricular stuff, anything outside of the game, was ever vaguely as important to Froggen as League of Legends the game. That was his true love. That was the game he was invested in the most, to the extent that in seasons when he didn't make it to Worlds, or he didn't go deep in tournaments, if I talked to him, or I asked him what he was doing in the off-season, he played more in the off-season than players who were going to World Championships, than players who just come back from them, than players who got new players in their teams. He thought his idea of a holiday was to go and play League of Legends and play insanely. So I've always felt like, in that sense, that's why I have like a kindred component, a spirit with those guys, because I think they have a similar thing to me, where that scarcity early on was part of what drove us into really embracing this thing, so that then we loved it so much and we were so connected and it was so a part of us that we've remained to the same degree. We've endured more. We've constantly kept working to improve, as opposed to people where it was a side thing, or it was a thing for a few years, that was a phase for them, and they've disappeared since then. So the historical component has always typified my work. It's always been a constant theme. It's just as more and more history existed, and as more and more narratives emerged, especially the ones that I could craft, then it became something where I became more conscious of focusing on it. And also, you have to look at the LAN scene back then. In the early days of Quake and Counter-Strike in the early 2000s, there was only, 1 or 2 big international tournaments a year. There would only be domestically, 2 or 3 big tournaments. I mean, when I say domestic, I mean within regions, not just countries. There wouldn't be many in Europe, and then there wouldn't be many internationally. So in the meantime, yeah, you'd have online leagues that were for no prize money, were just bragging rights, and were somewhat meaningless. And so in the downtime, like as a result, I'm interested in the most high level matches. So even back then, the great matches, the matchups online, the best teams battling together. So I never cared that much about the online games. So in the downtime of the online games, yeah, I'm not going to follow every one of those games and study them intensely and get excited about that, because that's not as exciting. So in that time, there was also a lot of space for me to develop these historical narratives and to start working on compilations of who was the best and how they contrasted before, and doing interviews that went more in depth and went back in someone's career in a way. And at the time, no one else really did that kind of work. Everyone else, I mean, it's funny, it's very similar to today, but obviously some people have taken up the baton and the torch a little bit, in as much as most people back then are like today. They're still just focused on what's happening now and what will happen tomorrow. That's where their focus is. And so they're just going with what's topical at the moment. And so they let the scene to some degree, or history, decide what they're going to do next in their job and their work. Whereas I'm always someone where I have things that preoccupy me, thoughts or players or connections or something in mystery I haven't quite, unraveled the riddle of, and something I'm working on. And I'm working on those things, I'm figuring them out. And then I'm looking for the right moment topically to connect this. This is something I learned about my work to make this sort of work popular and to make it have a chance to succeed, is then I'm looking for the time to bring that forwards and hopefully publish it. And then it can be something that has all this historical significance, but also can be interesting in that respect. And you've got to consider as well, the early scene of like I said, with so few lands and so few opportunities, it was very mysterious. I mean, especially the days I came along in 2001, there were so few interviews back then, and they were just little text ones where people had taken an IRC log, a chat messenger back then, and they would just paste the log, and it would just be a few things and some smileys and lol and a very simple explanation. There wasn't any depth at the time. And so when I came along, I wanted to do deep interviews, and I wanted to know not just about what's happening now, but what about this player you used to play with before, who's now your rival? I wanted to know all these things. I wanted to go and investigate the olden days when I wasn't around, or when they had tournaments in America that I couldn't go to. And so back then, you didn't even have VODs or demos from some of those tournaments. You just had the stories. And so you had to find someone who was there, or someone who knew something about it, gather the details. I tried to curate them oftentimes back then, because these websites were going down. I mean, the first .com bubble burst obviously was like in the 90s or early 2000s. And so we lost a lot of stuff. A lot of sites went down, a lot of interviews, a lot of demos, etc. So I was someone always trying to curate that stuff, trying to keep it going, because I was a fan. I was really interested in it in that respect. And you couldn't reach out to people in the same way back then. You couldn't find someone on Facebook or on Twitter or get a contact for Skype or whatever. Back then it'd be like MSN Messenger, AOL Instant Messenger. You couldn't get all the contacts to get out to people to get all this information. It was scarce. It was tough to get these connections back then. It wasn't as connected a world in that respect. And then in terms of why the esports historian, that actual title, I've always said this. I've told the story many times. I didn't come up with the name. What happened was I went to do one of the weekend cups for FACEIT, who back then were based in Milan in Italy, and they just did online cups. They didn't do offline tournaments. And this is 2013, I think. And they invited me to go initially to do like a Quake Cup, and I did a Counter-Strike Cup as well. And so, in the Quake Cup, they'd have like Cooler and Agent and Cypher and all these guys playing. And then in the Counter-Strike Cup, I remember there was one where it was like Fnatic, the one, I think it was actually before they had Pronax, playing against Very Games back then when they still had Shocks, I think. And so I went there to do one of those cups, and what they would do is when they had someone fly out to Milan, all they would do is just pay for the flight. They didn't even pay you to do any of the event, but at the time, okay, it's cool to just go out there once. I mean, actually, the circumstances of living there weren't so great. They didn't exactly have all the accoutrements that we have now. They couldn't take care of you in the same way that we're now accustomed to in our lifestyle, and you can ask Dan about that. DDK, he used to live a pretty sparse life. But when I went out there, when they would have a guest coming in to do commentary, they would actually make like a graphic, and it was some sort of weird, like, not inverted colors, but it'd be this weird one where like the face would be sort of red, and then it'd be like a gray background. It's very weird, like clashing color scheme, but very distinctive to FACEIT. And they would have a person's photo, which they'd made into like this image, like drawing over it. And then they'd put a tagline next to it. They'd try and come up with sort of a name for that person, a nickname. And so for me, what they came up with was the esports historian. Because there was this guy who worked for FACEIT at the time, who, that's how he said, that's who you are. You're the esports historian. And when he described it to me, I was like, well, yeah, I totally can see that. I have always been most interested in the history. And so, because that's the sort of stuff I'd done in my interviews and my articles, and that was the tone I always maintained, that's how he decided to describe me. And so I thought to myself, this is a great great alias, actually. So, you know what? I'm going to keep this. I'm going to use it for my Twitter header at the time. And this is going to be my new, something I'm going to include on, because it's a better way to describe me than just journalist. Because unfortunately, most people think of journalist in terms of everyday reporting of news or investigative journalism. And that's never been my bag in general. I've done a lot of reporting of news, obviously, because that's how I had to make my bread and butter, as it were. Actually, that doesn't make sense. That was my bread and butter. That's how I made my money over the years. But in general, you know, that's not the sort of journalist I am. I'm more a journalist who's writing up historically or is doing opinion pieces. I mean, I've only really done the opinion work in the later years. So I thought, yeah, that's a better way to describe it, right? I'd rather be the esports historian than a premier esports journalist or whatever someone might have described me as. And so I also think that my emphasis on that allowed me to play a key role back then in building up the dictionary or the vocabulary of the community in the games that I was in, so that we had these storylines because people had informed the newer people what the storylines were before. We had these ways of thinking about teams and players because we had the roles set, and we had terminology of how they played, and we had certain terminology for like superstar and star player and like role player, all these things. These were very vaguely out there, but since I played such a role in making sure these things were emphasized and attached to people and associated and modeled in my particular ways, everyone doesn't have to agree with it, but my particular way, I can see the impact it had, and that was rewarding in that particular sense. And we've gotten these epic storylines, and we can contrast them against history. I mean, this is one of the areas where I feel like I was actually quite early to pick up on this, because I remember in the early days of when, it was actually before I had an agent and before I had the sponsorship with Alpha Draft, where someone who was from the same agency who I had later be represented by actually came to me and he was like, oh, we've got, you know, we potentially can talk to some publishers about maybe doing some books. And so I thought of you, you know, do you have any ideas for like an esports book? And I told this guy what I still think to this day is a great concept for a book. And I still think with esports getting big could be could sell well, which is essentially along these lines. That I wanted to do a book, and it would be something along the lines of the heroes and villains of esports. Or you could have a different name, you know, of like the first cyber sporting culture, whatever you want to call it. But that would be the general gist of it. And the idea is we'd pick out people who, if you find out their storyline, you don't have to know anything about the specifics of the map they played and the scoreline that they played with it. You're just going to know who they beat, who they were playing against. It's going to add in not really like full on personality, but the persona of the person, and then how it links to their success. And the narrative means that people could get hooked on this shit without ever needing to actually know about the game. So like a couple of examples I'd give you would be like Naniwa and Doublelift. So I mean, you can see which way we're going with hero and villain there. So in terms of Naniwa, obviously considered a villain or an anti-hero or an antagonist to other people's heroes. This is someone, though, where you look at his early days, and he's someone where when he was a kid, his dad used to literally tell him something along the lines of like, it doesn't matter if you did well, were you the best? Were you number one? And so since that was instilled in him, he had a drive through his whole life when he got to esports as his career to go to Korea, live there in these terrible circumstances and conditions other pros wouldn't live in who are Westerners. They'd go back and then get beaten down. Every time he went back there, his win rate had dropped to like 50, 40, 30% again. He'd get his head kicked in trying to adapt to the new meta, but he'd have to get through that, and he wouldn't give up like a lot of them did and go back to the West. He'd keep working. Eventually it'd get good again. Then he'd go to Western tournaments. He'd do fantastically. He'd go really deep, but he never quite won. And so that always haunted him still. He was always coming second, always coming third. He could even beat the person who just beat him in the final, in the next tournament, if he played them in the semi-final, the quarterfinal. And he had this incredibly compelling story. And then you know about the rivalries he had, and the fact that on one hand, people might not have liked his personality, and they might not have liked some of the things he said or did, but on another hand, he was a hero in terms of his dedication, in terms of the fact that he represented what actually the Western fans wanted in terms of a champion, someone who really would try and do it the Korean way and battle the Koreans on their own turf, and had the balls to actually potentially beat the Koreans outright. This is exactly what they wanted. So he was such a, on some levels, like a paradoxical person, someone who had all these character flaws and inconsistencies, but then also flashes of brilliance in terms of what he could do, and someone who was so compelling as a result, who was polarizing, but in the same sense, he either attracted or repelled you. You never had just no influence from Naniwa. So in terms of Doublelift, I mean, I've told this story before actually in a video on my channel, which was that the short version is, if you look at the storyline of Doublelift, so the name Doublelift comes from a magic trick. It's one of those ones where you make like a card go to the top of the pack or whatever when you do that. And it's like the ace goes to the top or something. So he's someone, when he was a kid, he was interested in magic. He was interested in sleight of hand. He was interested in using your mechanics to produce something incredible. And when he started to become a League of Legends good player, top player, not yet the pro, the special player that we later would find. He had these arguments within his household because he comes from a second or third generation immigrant family from China, and they have a different view on how you're going to succeed in the West. And we've come to the West to do this, and we're giving you this opportunity. Why aren't you taking advantage of it and getting a life you couldn't have had in China, and becoming a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman? And instead, he's messing around with games, and his personality. He's a very forthright person. He's someone who thinks without speaking. Speaks without thinking sometimes, rather. And so there's going to be clashes there, and there's going to be times when there's not always the level of tact, maybe. And so he falls out with his family. They basically, in a fit of rage, tell him, like, get out. And then who knows what could have happened there. But for whatever reason, he leaves, and he actually ends up in this scenario where by becoming a pro and living with some community people, he's able to get going in his career, and his career becomes very successful. And he happens to be riding the wave of what then becomes the biggest esport, and becomes a global superstar, and becomes a great player. And what's the main defining characteristic of him as a great player? He is one of the best mechanical players to ever play the game, and consistently remains so. So in the end, how does he make his name? How does he make his fame? How does he make his money? He doesn't become a magician, but in the game, he becomes someone who uses mechanical, sleight of hand, skill, rote ability that's practiced and built in to do spectacular things, to make people marvel, to produce magic in that sense. That's a great story. Again, you didn't have to know anything about League of Legends, the champions Vayne, Caitlyn, how the AD carry roles played, what the significance of the early tournaments were, the fact that he was a support on Curse, and then they let him onto CLG and he was trained by Chat. None of that mattered, did it? You didn't have to know about the game. So if you can see the essence, this is why, to me, there's something special about narratives and about history. If you look at it from at least through my prism, through my perspective, and that's why I've been so compelled in that way. And then in terms of the historian element, there's a problem that people get into there. You notice, and this will probably be a theme in this interview, I assume, if we talk about some of the things I imagine you're going to bring up, is that people get so caught up in the semantics. They look at the symbol and they're obsessed by the symbol, interpreting it literally. So the historian fact doesn't mean I have to know the history of every game. Doesn't mean I have to know the history of every player. Doesn't mean I have to know every esports game to be the esports historian. Historians specialize. They pick their areas of interest, they go deeply into those, they speak about those, they write about those. A historian who's an expert on World War II doesn't have to comment on what the Mongols did, and he's still a historian. Now, yes, part of the issue is, in the earlier days, I covered most of the esports, and in that sense, I did know the history of most of the esports, and the industry, I absolutely know a lot of the history of, and a lot of the people who were behind the scenes and what went on and how it developed. And in some ways, I'm almost like a media theorist in that sense. Like the way it's unfolded as something I've also put a lot of thought into, how it philosophically changed and what went on in terms of business and thinking. But the definition of esports has grown. And now I don't always agree with that. Some of the things that people call esports now, personally, I don't. I think they're one-offs, and I think they're fads, or I think they're things that are too limited and don't occupy a lot of the definitions of what I would like the esports to be. But as it's grown, yes, I'm not going to be the esports historian who knows every esport. But I know enough, and I know the history of it, and I know I've specialized in my games, that in that sense, yes, I am the esports historian.
Okay, so beyond just being the moniker of the esports historian, there's a very distinct persona that you portray in your work whenever you're out in public, and it's very much what people know you by. People can say it's polarizing, or it's divisive, or it's provocative, but you were in esports 16 years. This is a guy who's been around a long time, many different games, going back through the different eras of esports. So presumably you weren't always the esports historian. You weren't always this persona that you present to the world now. Who were you back in the earlier days? Who were you in the first 10 years of your career? The guy where if people go back, they see the pictures where you're much thinner for a start off. You had the hockey shirts, the basketball jerseys, the crazy hair, no beard. Who was that guy? What was the persona like back then?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, yeah, back then I was a very different person, and as a result, my persona, what I showed to the public and what people knew me as within the industry, was very different. Yeah, I had the sports jerseys and the hockey shirts, and I never took care of my hair, and I didn't particularly care about the exterior, about my appearance. I mean, you go back to the earliest days when I first started, and you look at some of the pictures, I was a very vanilla person, actually. I hadn't developed a lot of aspects of myself. Some of the purest essence was initially there, but it hadn't found a way to manifest in any way. And as a person, I was nothing like I am now. I mean, that doesn't entirely work. I mean, in as much as I wasn't as extreme or as developed in a lot of the areas as I am now. You would have really had to know me well to see any of the roots of these elements that developed later. I mean, in the first few years, like the first 2 to 3 years, in my work, it was only about the work. I did my interviews, I did my articles. There was no Twitter back then. I didn't go in a lot of IRC channels. I didn't really have much of a public persona there. I just did my work essentially. And so it was only really when I went and worked with ESEA in the early days of when they launched Premium, where actually I was a partner within the business and I was directly involved, and as a result had a huge incentive to do a lot of content. Now, at this point in time, my work was still my work, but now I started to get a bit involved. I'd go on the forums and I'd battle people in debates and I'd say crazy things. I mean, not crazy, if people are already going to think that means like outrageous. No, I'd just say things that were like trash talk or provocative or whatever, and we'd have these back and forths. And yeah, start to develop it a little bit there and show a bit of my wit or a bit of my raw persona in that sense. But it was things in life that developed me more beyond that, because actually it was around that time where, because now in terms of income I could start to actually justify this being a full-time job. Before that I worked like it was my only job anyway, but I just didn't earn very much money, and I was in a situation where it's only thanks to my parents that I was able to do a lot of those things early on without having to do more school or do more work on the side. But now I was actually just starting to get income, which, I mean, it seems like a joke right now how much I was making, but at least on some low level I could justify that I'm doing what I love. And so it afforded me a lifestyle, which is that in that lifestyle, yeah, I would do my esports work and I watch all the tournaments, but I had all my free time was my time. And so in that time, a lot of the things I did there, I can see the direct influence and impact they had on the rest of my life and my career. I mean, I read lots and lots of books. I had so many that I was able to buy and was able to read, and I'm able to go back to old books and read them and get through so many that I wanted to read, that those really developed out and showed me directions I could go down in terms of thinking or learning skills, etc. And obviously in terms of fiction, the vistas of imagination that opened up were incredible, because I really went all over the place in terms of what I read. It was very kind of quixotic, the mix of books I was interested in. And in learning about different people and philosophies and ways of thinking, I discovered psychedelics, and that certainly had a unique and to some degree expansive effect on how I thought, or what I thought was possible, or how I conceived of the world. And then that really keyed me into the way some of those people were thinking and took me down those directions. I watched lots and lots of movies. I mean, I remember there was one period in time in the mid 2000s where I did get the IMDb top 250, and I just went down, I made a list out of all of them. I tried to get everyone that I could, and everyone that looked interesting to me, I would watch. And so I got through an insane amount of movies. I would pick someone like Alfred Hitchcock. I'd go back and watch all the movies I could out of him. I'd pick an Orson Welles. I'd go watch all the movies I could him. I'd try and watch every weird foreign movie at the time. This is actually quite a long time before a lot of people were into foreign language movies. But I was trying to see, is there some amazing, brilliant director out there that I've never heard of, because all his stuff's in Korean or Japanese or whatever it might be, and then find those people and devour all their work, and yeah, be very different, and you'd have to kind of learn a new, almost like visual and effects wise vocabulary to enjoy it. And then as a result, in doing so, what do you start to learn? There's cultural differences and there's nuances you have to learn, and until you learn those aspects, you're going to kind of be like a colorblind person trying to look at something that's in bright, full, thousands of colors that you can't all interpret. You've got to kind of develop that sense to some degree. I mean, obviously the colorblind person can't develop it, but that's the problem. Otherwise, without that, you don't have the ability to even see those things because you haven't got the cultural background. So I had to develop that aspect, which certainly opened my mind in terms of thinking about the world in general, because in esports I'd always been someone who hadn't tied myself to the UK scene. Immediately from day one, I wanted to be on the global scene. I cared about the best players, no matter where they came from, no matter what country, no matter what culture. I wanted to learn about them. It was never about where I came from or some preferred region in that sense. And I think that was helped me a lot in the early days, and it's something that developed on more in my personality. I mean, in terms of music, again, I'm someone who's never really just listened to the music that comes out now. I mean, if it's someone I like, I'll check it out, etc. But I've been someone where if I get into, for example, in the last sort of 5-10 years, I got into prog rock music. So I've been back and seen so much stuff in the 70s and spanning into the early 80s. And I'll happily go back and consume all those albums rather than necessarily jump on whatever the new thing is, even in that genre now. I mean, in sports, this was an area that really helped me with my work, because later I could transfer a lot of these things and see connections and come up with inspirations or sparks of imagination from a sport, and then look in esports and find something similar. So, I mean, I got into the NBA very heavily, and luckily at that time, you really could go out there, and sadly you can't really do this now, and there was sites where you could get a lot of the old games, and it was a very passionate community that would put up a lot of old games and take them off tape and transcode them, and it was incredible. I could go back and I could watch 20-30 years of the NBA. I got into MMA, which at the time they hadn't shut down all the sites, so you could get all the videos online, watch them all. I watched some NHL. That was harder because it wasn't as big a global sport, but I watched what I could and I read what I could. I was also able, due to the fact that I was just working online, to live in foreign countries. I lived in Finland with Natu for a few months. That was a very different life. At the time, I was in a very different emotional state, so I had a very unique experience there. I went and lived in Canada, in Montreal, with Steele, the old Team 3D player, the Canadian-Bulgarian guy. Lived there with him, had a totally different experience. And what's funny is that really was like that was in the summer I went, so it was fantastic weather. Finland, it had been in the winter or like late autumn, so it was incredibly cold. I lived in the Netherlands for a spring to a summer once and got to experience that and to really test the limits of hedonism to some degree and see that like kind of how hollow that life can be if there's not something more, some kind of a purpose that you decide to assign yourself and work towards in a direction you want to head in. That really helped me. So there's also the fact that I think my persona was also very much shaped by the work situations that I was put in, the environments and then what happened within them that made me go one direction or another. I mean, in the early days, because I was so into it, my ideas and my talent for coming up with stuff, that I'd kind of use that as a crutch. I was someone who could come up with question answers or could come up with an idea for how a player might be characterized and have an impetus to do something about a player that I kind of thought that should be all I have to do. I don't necessarily have to work super hard beyond that. I don't necessarily have to conform in any particular way. I definitely don't have to work on any other technical aspects because the idea itself is great. And it was only later on, I mean, I've told this story before, that a pro player, a friend of mine, it was Steele, the guy I mentioned before, who I lived in Canada with, he once commented to me, this is years before I lived with him, that he said something along the lines of like, oh, I'm sure that, like, I once asked him about practice and the fact his team wasn't doing well and things were going badly. And he made some sort of comment like, oh, well, I still practice this certain amount of time and in a very set way to improve, even though this is an area I'm good in, because, you know, this is my craft. This is something I'm dedicated to and I'm trying to be the best in it. And so he said, I'm sure you practice the same way in your craft. And the funny thing is at the time, it was like, haha, yeah. But then I really thought about it. I thought, I don't know. That's the thing. Like I do my work and I do my paid work. And yeah, for fun, I enjoy the sport, as it were, of this esport. And I like to know these details, but I don't really apply myself. I don't put in the research the same way I could. I don't make myself do a certain amount of time per day to develop my skills and to develop the work itself. And then I started thinking to myself, why don't I do that? Like if I was to do that and I have some kind of talent itself, then think what I could accomplish. I mean, I always remember this. That one of my favorite movies is the movie Rudy, the one that Sean Astin's in, where he plays a guy who just wants to be a Notre Dame football player in university, but he's short and he's not fast, and he doesn't have strength, etc. And the story of how he does it is really inspirational story. I mean, it might seem cheesy to some people, but for me, it really hits all the key high moments. It's a fantastic movie, even though it's a very low budget one. And I remember there was a comment years later where actually one of my favorite basketball players, Kobe Bryant, I think it was around 2008, 2009, he did like a blog on his website and he mentioned something like that he'd just seen that movie again. And he thought to himself, this is one of the most dedicated players of all time, what if I worked that hard? Now, he was already someone very dedicated, but seeing this guy who had way less talent than him, who had achieved way less than he had in his field, made Kobe himself think, is there more I can do? If I really went all out and I have this talent, who could stop me? What could stop me accomplishing the things I want to do and achieving greater levels of who I am as a person and what I can show to the world? And that's kind of something that really sticks with me in that sense, that I really started to develop this work ethic because I was never good at networking. So here's another factor that really helped me out is that early on, I got by being the best or by being someone who's very unique in that sense. And so people had to put up with whether I was someone who wasn't polite and didn't have tact and had a very extreme personality to some degrees and was difficult sometimes to work with and wanted to be left to and have full autonomy in the days when you had to work under someone, etc. And so that led to what was essentially my self-imposed exile, which was once one of my jobs ended, which was with the SEA, then I went away and there were big sites out there, but they weren't coming and asking me, hey, you can please work for us and we'll pay you one of the top salaries. They weren't. And so at the time I had the choice. I could either go to these sites and ask them for work or I could start work for a smaller site. And at the time I thought, I'm not going to do that. Like at the time I found some other ways to go. So I was doing some ghostwriting. I started making those guides. These really sustained me with Rambo and with Steel and with Fraud. And for a few years in my self-imposed exile, I had even more time to explore all those aspects I talked about before. I was able to develop more of these things. And what happened was, through particularly the period I said when I went to the Netherlands, and it was a very hedonistic period, and I was doing my esports work, and I was getting it all done, but I wasn't dedicated in all other areas of life, and I was just enjoying life, and I was trying to find out, is this what I want in life? Do I want to just work a bit and to enjoy that and have that be over here, and then not to have to work the rest of the time, to just enjoy myself, do whatever I want, live a very chilled life, enjoy the pleasures of life? And what I found was that alone can't be the main part of your life. That can be part of your life, and it can be a component that you certainly need, but there's got to be something you're working towards. There's got to be something that you're improving. There's got to be something that in and of itself on a day-to-day basis you can get satisfaction from, and you can do, and it has meaning, significance to you. And so that's when I came back, and it was actually at the end of that year when I came home to the UK that I started working again for smaller sites. And when I was working for smaller sites, I mean, initially, actually, I'd gone back to ESEA, but then I had again an argument with some of the people there, and I was out from ESEA again. So when I was out from ESEA, I went to a small site that no one knew, and I just found a guy who was into the stuff I was doing, and who was able to pay me a little bit of money. It was very little back then, and he was willing to get, as a result, tailor everything around me, and I really started to really dedicate myself. So even though these articles weren't getting much views at the time, I wasn't working for a big site, there wasn't Reddit, etc. I was only getting a few thousand hits when something would get linked by another site, or some people would see it. And I didn't have Twitter back then. And so this hard work, though, I put in as much time there as anyone right now in esports does and has. I put in insane hours, and I would, even all the time that I started to do things for fun and watch basketball games and watch and read books about philosophy, I'd be finding a way to relate it all back to esports. And I was finding a way to make my esports work as much about me as I could, or as much what I'm into and my thinking as I could, and really develop it and work on my craft. And then I got my breaks. Then I got into SK. Then I went to Team Ace later. And this is one of the key things, is that doing things my way became the most valuable approach. I learned, actually, when I worked for these bigger sites, that's not just about working on your craft, but when you work for a company, one thing I learned that I didn't know, this was an epiphany to me, and other people will understand it, is that the most important qualities to a big company are that you're reliable. You turn up when you say you will, you're there when they ask you to be, you do the things they ask you to do, you're hardworking, you put in your effort to make your work the best that you can do it, whether that's whatever standard they want or not. You take initiative, you suggest things that can help the company, you come up with ideas that help other people, you're helpful. Now, these qualities are more important than talent. They're more important than the standard of the work you do. If you can have these qualities, you can get away with having less talent and have a career in esports and anywhere in life. But if you can do all these things and you have talent, that's what will get you hired, actually, not the talent. It's not the raw talent. Because there's one thing, actually, people in companies and who are responsible people high up the chain hate. It's people who, yes, if they hired this guy, he could do amazing things and potentially could transform everything, but he's also unreliable and they can't corral him, they can't deal with him, they don't know what they're going to get from him, and have all these other problems that's going to come with him. That's why, if you look at pro sports, you do get these incredible people where they're amazing players, but people don't want to deal with them. And when they get past their prime, especially, they get thrown out long before they should have. They should have been able to play more years. The Dennis Rodmans of the world, the Chad Johnson. There's so many examples that there's a reason people don't want to deal with these guys anymore. And I have to say, in the early days, one of the things about my persona as well was, in the early days, it was very sparse how much work you can do, how much you can get paid, and so you could be a bit freer. But in the later days, we're talking like late 2000s, so like 2008 to 2010, I had to come back and take up editor jobs. I had to be the editor-in-chief, so I had to be in charge of other people, and this took up a massive amount of my time. And so that's one of the reasons in this period that I still hadn't developed my persona now. It was still a guy who was very hardworking, was trying to get all the things done, was trying to run a site, and I was never that good at being an editor. Back then, especially, I wasn't that good at mentoring people. I've developed that a lot later, and actually, funnily enough, especially since I've become independent. But back then, when you kind of forced to do it, I wasn't that good at it. And so unfortunately, my approach was still my approach to do my work. And so I would try and take up the slack of what I couldn't do at the site with other people by doing it myself, and try and take over 4 or 5 different jobs at once, which obviously later in my career has helped me when I've gone independent. And I do many, many different things. There's also the fact that at the time, unfortunately, another kind of the recession meant that there wasn't much money going around. The money was like a tenth of what it had been a year or two before. And so the budget was non-existent. I also couldn't get quality people. So I had to take constant beginners, train them up, then they'd leave or they'd quit or they'd lose interest because they were just random guys, and I'd have to keep doing that again, and I'd have to pick up the slack and do the work. And so I worked ridiculous hours in this period in time, but not on stuff that you can see now, not on great work that you can go and see and great pieces. I did some of that on the side, almost for fun and to have some for the site. But a lot of the work I did was just raw man hours, data entry, writing up news posts. It's stuff that was the most mundane stuff. And so at the time, yeah, you didn't see a lot of my persona. There wasn't a lot of personal expression to the same degree. And I was someone who I at least embraced the work ethic and really developed that and saw like a kind of endurance, a stamina I could build up. And that's all I cared about in life. I didn't care about the exterior, and I didn't know at the time I'd get an opportunity to really explore some of these other things and have a persona in this particular respect.
So then what has changed from those early days to produce this current persona? Is this just who you are?
The whole persona thing it's a pretty tricky topic. I mean, first of all, I know there's some people, in fact, a lot of people who probably haven't thought about the topic, who really think like there is no such thing as a persona, it's just you. Or they think that you shouldn't have a persona, that somehow it's dishonest or it's disingenuous to have a different way of interacting with people than whoever you are on a day-to-day basis with other people. Now, my own perspective on that is it's naive, because I actually think that, at least the perspective I've modeled life and my career from, I think everyone in life shows a different face or speaks in a different voice depending on who they're talking to and what type of person, what relationship they have with the person they're talking to. I mean, there's this saying that I've seen so many times on the internet, and I remember I looked it up. It's always listed as like a Japanese proverb, and it's this one that says, like, you know, the Japanese, they have three faces. There's the one that you show the world, there's the one you show your friends, and there's the one that you show your family. And this is kind of like supposed to be a metaphor for, you know, the different ways you interact and what you let people see of you. Now, it is a great saying. It's a great thing. Unfortunately, when I researched it, apparently it has no basis in Japanese culture as a proverb. I mean, that actual way of explaining it supposedly comes from the classic Western novel by James Calville, which, by the way, Samuel is a fan of, called Shogun, where it's about a Western guy who goes over to Japan and he experiences their culture and how different it is. And this is kind of like the gist is the same, the way that he described there, just different wording of trying to explain to people in the West how their culture is. But there is a concept within Japanese culture I did find that is somewhat similar, which is that they have this thing called like hone and tateme or something. Hone is like true sound. So that's like the idea of like what you actually think, who you actually are, and what you would express if it was someone very close to you who you could trust and it wasn't going to get out there to just anyone willy-nilly. And then the tatame is the facade. It's the face you have to put on to engage with the world, where especially obviously in cultures like Japanese culture, which is very much about honor and about how you treat people and about a hierarchy of how you have to behave to certain people depending on their business and public relationship with you. You can't say all the things you think, and you can't be critical of people in a certain way, and you have to behave in a certain manner that fits this set relationship. And they have it it's very stratified and very structured in their culture. But I think this, to some degree, exists in all cultures. I mean, you don't say to your best friends in a fun, joking environment like a pub what you would say to your grandmother if she was sat there as well. You wouldn't say the same joke. You wouldn't make the same comment. You wouldn't be as mean to your grandmother. You wouldn't make the same sort of sly remark or make some sort of sexual comment about a woman who passed by. You wouldn't do that if your grandmother was sat there. But if you were sat with your grandmother, you also wouldn't behave with your friends the way you would behave with your grandmother, the way you talk to her and the stories you talk with her and the way you'd listen to her and the kinds of things that you would say with her and what would be considered humor with her. Now, what the key thing here is, it's not that one's the true self and one's not. It goes both ways in this respect. Like, you might be able to talk to your grandmother about some things that are very personal, very deep, that you can't say in front of that group of friends, especially a social group, not just one of them one-on-one privately. But then the other way around too. You can't show the same sense of humor and be as frivolent and be as flippant with your grandmother as you can with those friends. So they're both true and they're both important and they're both very necessary. And so beyond all of that, I do think that there is a part that you keep for yourself. I mean, this is one area that I think a lot of people who've experienced fame and celebrity, this is why I think a lot of them are incredibly neurotic and paranoid and to some degrees lose themselves, because they naively think, because aspects of their persona are translating and being liked by the public, that their success comes from just being totally themselves and being totally honest and saying everything they want to. And therefore, these elements destroy them. And these are the things that come back to crush them and restrict them and make people hate them or make them feel like everyone has to know everything they're thinking and they have to share everything and do tell-all books and interviews and all this. I don't think that's the case. I think you have to craft this persona and you have to put some of yourself in it and make it unique to yourself. That, yes, is what's going to allow you to succeed and what's going to engage with the world and be kind of the currency that you exchange with the world in exchange for money and time and fame and all these things. But there's still going to be something you keep to yourself, something that's not for other people, something that you value more and that you guard in that respect. And then you share with the people that as a result, it will have a significance that you share it with this person who has a special relationship with you, a friend, a partner, a parent, a relative, whatever it might be. That's the relation that is you're going to share some aspect of this. It might be a different aspect, but you're going to share something with. And so beyond that, I also think it's the case that I know in my personal case, and I think in general from what I've seen of other people, I don't think you consciously design your persona entirely. Like, you can't look at it like they sat there on day one, like, right, the character's going to be like this and he's going to do this and in the future he's going to respond in these ways. What happens is it's an ongoing process. You're adapting as you go. And I think in general, what happens is it develops and it comes out of who you are and your strengths and what you've done. But then you tweak it a little bit where you can, and you try and polish off some of the rougher edges and you try and direct it a little bit the way you want it to go. And then you sometimes figure out if you went too far, maybe you want to keep that aspect to yourself, and you're figuring it out as you go. And for someone like me, who's had like a 16 year public career, yeah, it's changed over time and I've developed it differently and it's gone in different directions. And now it's become, yeah, fairly set to some degree, but it can still change a bit. And it's only become set because I've had so much time to learn and reflect and to see and to explore and experiment with things that now it looks like a set extreme persona, very, very pure, very an essence of me, etc. But that's because I had so many years to test that stuff out. If I was someone coming in right now, I don't know that you'd be able to see this. Or if I did, maybe I'd go down the route I said before and I'd show too much and it'd be a problem for me in my life. So the context of being an esports journalist is also a big deal as far as the persona goes. Because what a lot of people won't know, because at the moment, the two most famous esports journalists, most likely across esports, is me and Richard Lewis. And because we are people who put aspects of our personality and a lot of raw things and express ourselves in a manner which doesn't necessarily conform to how a lot of people think you should, almost in the Japanese sense, talk, and how someone who's a journalist should be allowed to behave or speak. It makes a lot of people, unfortunately, I think, imagine that becoming a big esports journalist means you have to do that. Now, not necessarily, because actually in the early days, that wasn't what any of them really did in general. Like Carmack to some degree put his personality out there, but not necessarily to this degree. And one of the reasons why is because back then, so much of being an esports journalist, for other people especially, relied on other people. You need to get interviews, you need to get information from organizations, you need to be able to go and talk to people and not be shunned by them. So as a result, ultimately, it's a job where you want the players, the esports industry, and the people in the audience to like you. Now, this wasn't the case for me as much. I went a very different route. But for most people, that's the job of a journalist. You've got to have the connections. You've got to network. That's going to be your initial primary skill. And then you're going to build up technical ability and understanding of the industry and experience and all these other factors. So a lot of people, as a result, would say as a journalist, don't risk saying anything that the players won't like. Don't risk saying things that might piss off fans. Don't venture too much opinion in case there's backlash against it and people don't like that and it turns people off. So people would generally tell you, at all costs, try and be everyone's friend. Now, that was never my bag anyway. That was never the way I really did it. I was never the most liked, even when I kept my mouth shut. By the way, there was a period like 2009 and 2012 where I didn't do a lot of public, didn't really say things publicly. I just did my work. I was very hardworking, very reliable. I was incredibly professional in all respects. I mean, I'm in many of those respects now, but there was nothing in theory to put people off. And I wasn't the most liked back then. People weren't attracted to me because guess what? Part of charisma actually comes from showing part of your personality. You can't just hide it all. You can't just lock it all off and not share anything. That way you might be successful on the most basic day-to-day level of what you did in that piece of work. And you might not offend anyone, but you won't attract people either. And so as time went on, I gradually got into that. I never consciously thought about it. I tried out my opinions when I got onto Twitter. And then I went on talk shows. I went on Unfiltered, those early episodes. I went on podcast when Khan set it up. And I had an epiphany over time when I saw how people reacted to my actual opinions and giving real thoughts on things that I thought were bullshit and I thought this was nonsense. The epiphany I had was I was never the most liked anyway. I'm never going to be the most liked. I'm not charismatic in that particular sense that I win everyone over. I'm never going to be loved in that respect. But by being uniquely myself, first of all, I get my niche. I have such a strong flavor that some people like that flavor. And then the key thing is, if the work is good enough, and I do a good enough job in that respect, or the way I provoke when I say something, which by the way doesn't mean I try to provoke necessarily. There's a difference between jokes and I'm talking about work and opinions here. When you say something that's meant as just, it's a strong comment, if it provokes in a certain manner that has nuance and there's a complex nature to it, then people don't just dislike it and then ignore it and push it to one side. They dislike it and they engage with it. And that to me was the epiphany in my work of my persona and how the balance I want with my persona, which is that some people are really going to like it and some people are going to be on the same wavelength as me, enjoy it. But even the people who aren't, they can at least experience it and to some degree enjoy it or dislike or enjoy disliking it and engage with it all the same and give their opinions and say why they think it's nonsense or why I'm an idiot or whatever. And in doing so, that's the secret to being able to have such a strong personality and be successful, because otherwise you'd be so niche that only the niche would follow you and everyone else would ignore you. It's like the worst thing for someone like in that position is to be ignored entirely. So I would say, yeah, in general, to some degree, what I've mastered is that people will view or consume my content, even if they dislike my persona, either because the content's good enough, there's something there about it, or because even if they dislike all the nature of how I characterized it, they want to engage, and as a result, they react to it. That's a key element, I would say, overall. Now, I would say that there's some people that I've been able to reflect on their careers and pick some of these things up from. So one of them that I found quite inspirational was Chael Sonnen, the UFC, the MMA fighter, because he is a guy where I actually knew Chael Sonnen as a UFC fighter because I followed MMA long before he became the guy who's the huge draw, who's the box office guy who did all the best interviews and had all the best quotes. And back then, he was kind of how I saw myself back then, someone who didn't have a lot of a persona in that sense. He just worked incredibly hard. He did the things he was good at. He tried to expand a bit. He was never necessarily the absolute best and the number one most lauded guy, but he was very good. He was always on the brink. And what he did is he actually took one of the most boring styles of fighting for the average fan, but by building up this persona, which was definitely informed by him and who he is and his sense of humor, but then in some ways is for the public. It's not just for him or people that close to him. It has wit and it has banter and it has provocative things in there. He became the biggest draw in all of MMA. I mean, the only person who arguably was even bigger at the time was GSP, who, I mean, he had all of Canada on his side for a start off, and he was a champion and was never losing the belt. And so he had every factor going for him. Chael Sonnen was never the champion. Chael Sonnen was never the best fighter in the UFC or in his weight division. Chael Sonnen was never the most exciting fighter, was never a guy knocking people out or even finishing people quite often. Yet he managed to become the biggest draw with, in theory, the most boring style. Now, my style isn't that boring. Sure, back then it was a lot about historical articles and long stuff, and I hadn't figured out the narrative stuff to the same degree I have now. It was kind of tied into some very detailed niche stuff. But unpacking some of the things he did, I remember thinking to myself, that if I do some of those things, or if I head in that direction, if I experiment in that way, and then I have the quality work behind it, that way when people experience it, it's also like the show, the advert gets them in the door, and then they try the product and it's good, then that's going to be the key to the most success. And that's going to give you the greatest chance to succeed. That's also why when people think I'm a contrarian and all that, I do that to just stir up attention or whatever. Not really. It's that I've developed my perspective so much that because it comes from my life experiences and all these different areas I'm interested in feed back into it, it's so uniquely me that it's very rare that it's going to line up perfectly with the consensus or with what other people who are very famous and experts think. It's going to, even if it goes in that direction, go its own unique way because of who I am and what I've done in my life and the kind of the quest that I've taken for my own thinking, not just following other people's. So I have my own perspective. It's not that I'm not contrary to what everyone thinks. Sometimes a lot of the consensus agrees with me. It's that sometimes I even set the consensus amazingly, but I've developed my own perspective. But I will note, one aspect that I will say is, as much as I have all this persona, it's tied to my work and I have my opinions in there that are my personal opinions, I don't involve my actual personal life. If you ever go and look, it's very rare I actually have real elements of my life, aside from the odd anecdote that I might throw in there just as a funny story. In general, a lot of people don't know about my personality, who I actually am as a person. They don't know about my personal life. They don't know about my relationships. A lot of that I do shield from the persona and I do keep to myself because I think there should be a space and a realm where you don't share it with other people. And I think that's healthy. And I think it serves a beneficial role in society.
Richard Lewis is another esports journalism name often associated with your own from having worked with him, appeared on each other's shows, obviously worked together on E-League most notably. What is the relationship like with Richard Lewis?
Yeah, well, the thing about working with Richard is that there was a number of years where we were competitors to a degree. I mean, he was a journalist coming from Source. I was coming from 1.6 in Counter-Strike. Then obviously CSGO happened. The two worlds were thrown together. And I already knew him by this time. And we'd had our fallings out over things. And we obviously got very strong personalities and can be combative when we feel like people are being combative with us or treating us unfairly. So we had our fallings out. But then eventually I think we sort of saw, I mean, he always says like real recognize real. There is that to a degree. It's that we kind of saw that as much as we're different, we're also alike in some elements of how we approach things and how we think and our core tenets and values. And then even if, I mean, obviously over time we did develop into friends, but at the time it was more like there's just an ally. Like there's a scenario where it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's like a sort of thing that we saw when we saw all these scumfucks around us in esports, fucking everyone over, and these players with egos out of control, and other journalists who were just assholes printing a load of nonsense or just doing stuff just for their own fame. We could see that this is someone else who's real in that respect. And so I think early on we had that connection. And then in terms of working together, I mean, obviously it was esports events we mainly worked together first of all, where we were analysts together, and then later on, he was the host as well. I think that's always been a great relationship in terms of our working relationship, because first of all, we're both very hardworking guys. We're both guys who turn up on time. We do what's necessary. We can both fill a lot. We obviously are the two like originators of the banter style that really did start like full on with Gfinity G3 in August of 2014 when it was us two as the analyst and Scoots as the host. Now, as an analyst, again, he went a different route. He didn't try to be the expert. He didn't try to be the Yanko or go down that kind of a route of analysing the game. We were analysing the game in a different respect from our own specialities and our own fields of experience, and then our own punditry of what we saw in the game and what we thought about it. And so we went a different route, and we added in the banter to make up for when we couldn't always do expert analysis of something or the game wasn't that interesting. Now, I think as a host, funnily enough, in some respects, I think as a host, Richard might actually be even better. I think he's done a fantastic job of nailing like the cues he's got to do, of involving people, of letting them go without like reining them in too much. I've worked with a lot of hosts who they get really worried. As soon as that guy in their ear tells them, go to the game, they're like, guys, and they're like trying to do signals and stuff. Richard will like let it breathe a bit, and he'll go, okay, yeah, I'm there. And then he'll just let them go, and then he'll find the right moment to come in. It'll look so smooth. I think he's done a fantastic job in that respect. So I enjoyed both elements. I liked it when we were the analysts and we had Scoots as the host. Scoots is an amazing host in his own right, but in a different way. I think Richard did a great job of being charismatic on camera, of knowing all these things. He became very polished, I think, especially by the E-League days, and has done a great job of having jokes and being able to insert his opinion in his jokes, but giving us room as well. And obviously he's known us so in depth and worked for so long with us that we have the best patter with each other. We have the best we're on the same frequency to some degree. And then he knows what you want to do and gives you the room to do it. And then obviously another element of how we worked together was when we did By the Numbers, which was, originally, it was just going to be a show where we'd analyze the stats to tell people who to pick in Alpha Draft contests. But what Richard figured out for the CS one was to just make it essentially a podcast, make it a weekly talk show. And while, because he had to be a host of that, he maybe didn't get to put as much of his own opinions in as he would if he'd have just been a guest, I do think that show, it had so much potential that unfortunately, because of Alpha Draft no longer existing, and then him taking the E-League job, I think it's a shame we couldn't continue that, because I do feel as though in its own right, I feel like the banter on that show was incredible. We had a really good kind of run in that sense. I feel like he did a good job of bringing up controversial topics, but also getting us onto the day-to-day topics. And I feel as though, given time, that could have been something even more epic. Like, I think the chemistry there was insane, and I think people reacted to it, and they loved that show as a result. And I actually feel like that should, if things had continued on and all the resources had been there and the game had kept getting bigger and we'd risen with kind of the level of the tide, I feel like that could have become like the first take or the undisputed of esports. I feel like it could have been that thing where you've got those two guys who can talk about anything and they can fill any amount of time and they can make jokes and banter and they've always got their own take on things, but you want to hear when something happens, then you want to hear what they think about it. I think that we could have been those guys, and maybe in a different life, in an alternate universe, we would have been, or maybe one day, who knows, maybe the paths will cross again and the right circumstances will happen where we could do that.
So an area of your work people are going to be most familiar with is your work as an analyst, at working on CSGO events, on the desk, over with those guys, the hosts, the other experts, the other analysts. So what's going on with that? Who is Thorin the analyst? What are you trying to do within that realm?
So the thing about the event analysis is the role of an analyst who sits on the desk. You have to understand that in the early days, that didn't exist in CSGO. There weren't actual specialist analysts in CSGO until I did it at DreamHack Winter 2013. Before that, they used to bring up on DreamHack events the commentators. They'd come to the desk, they'd talk about the game there, then they'd go away. You remember commentators also used to be mixed in on the early desks that I was on, but it was at DreamHack Winter 2013, the first major, that they brought me on as just an analyst. That's all I was going to do. I mean, even in League of Legends, they would have the casters do analysis before the game and after the game, but they wouldn't necessarily be on a desk. And yeah, they'd have worlds where you'd have a few on the desk. Okay, there was some degree of it, but in CSGO, it didn't really exist. Now, first of all, I've got to give big props to Khan here, former all-time great in-game leader of Fnatic, one of the greatest in-game leaders in Counter-Strike history, because he's someone who, from talking to me privately, like when he was in Fnatic and he was a pro player, we actually had a very contentious relationship. We were guys who'd snipe back and forwards at each other, and we were both obviously very opinionated. And so I'd like make fun of something he said in an interview, or he'd fire back at me about the fact I worked for SK, which was like the rival organization to Fnatic at the time. And what happened was, as we got to know each other, and we got each other like on Skype and MSN Messenger and all these things, and we talked privately, we would still argue a lot. Like, I got to know him a lot more, got to know why he thought these things and the background of them, and to get deeper in these topics. But we would always, it's like we were friendly, but we would battle. And we were so opinionated. All we did in those Skype conversations is it was just epic arguments about like, oh, who was this player better than you? Oh, but if he'd have had this star player, he'd wrecked you and he'd have done better things. Oh, yeah, but you don't know about what I did with this player. It was back and forth. It was like a steel cage death match. It was unreal, but it was so fun as well. And we were having a lot of fun with the ideas. And obviously, Lurpus was involved in this as well, in as much as he knew Khan and was friendly with him, but he also knew me and was friendly with him, and he would also criticize Khan on some of these things. And so Khan, I don't know how he had this idea, but when CSGO was starting, so we're talking about latter part of 2012, he had this idea that the scene was so small and no one really cared about Counter-Strike at the time, and a lot of people were losing interest because 1.6 had died off, you know, and CSGO hadn't gotten rolling and didn't look like it being a big esport, and as an esport, it had no place, it had no majors at that time, it had no huge events and a huge global scene. He had this idea, because he'd retired like 8 months earlier, he had a notion that because he was working for Fnatic, he wanted to create some content. So he wanted to do a podcast, a kind of a roundtable discussion, weekly if possible, about what was going on in CSGO. And so what he did was, he remembered back on those conversations and how opinionated we were and what extreme personalities we had, and then the banter, the back and forwards. And he thought, right, I'll get Thorin, I'll get Lurpus, and then myself, so Khan, and we'll make a 3-man thing. It was called Podcast, named famously after the pod bots that used to be the most famous type of bot that you used to play against in CS 1.6. And we made this podcast, and I think it started in early 2013. So it was still, I know, when NiP was in their 87-0 run, they were just winning every tournament. So a lot of the discussion was about NiP early on, and about CSGO developing as a game, and about Very Games, and would they ever beat NiP. And you start to see here some of the persona that I've started to show later on, and some of the opinions that, especially in terms of analysis, have become key. Because one thing I have to say about that type of podcast where you're just a guest is that basically is analysis. At least the type of analysis I like to do, that's what's going on those podcasts. And I have to say, not only did Khan, he was the mastermind that came up with that idea. And by the way, when someone like Khan, a legend like that, asks you to be part of their project like that, you don't turn those opportunities down. Those are things that, like, they don't come along that often, and that's a privilege to be offered as much. And I have to say, beyond that even, in the early days of CSGO, before I'd done majors, etc., he was a guy who I've seen him do interviews and mention to people, tell them that I might be the best caster in the world, or I could be the best caster in the world, or I could be the best analyst in the world, and big me up in that particular respect. And that's one of the interesting things, I think, from all those battles with him, and from him getting to know me as a person. He saw an aspect to me, a depth, that actually a lot of people have never recognized at that point in time. And a lot of people now wouldn't, because they think I just make jokes or my content's crap or whatever. Which is that he kind of sees how I do see the game in a different way, and it has depth in my own specific respect. That's one of the reasons why 2 years after the podcast days, he actually offered me a job as the head coach of the League of Legends team. And obviously League of Legends is a game I've never been a pure expert in terms of the strategy in. But he saw some of the qualities there and the way I thought and understood my philosophy, that he was willing to give it a try and wanted me to get on board. So someone I've always had a lot of respect for, and I'll definitely credit for some of the aspect of how I got into this analysis stuff. Now, again, as I've kind of described with my journalism, it's always been about developing my own perspective. I've never tried to be an expert in any other sense. My way of analysing the game is, first of all, I analyse stylistic clashes. I look what the styles of team are in an abstract general sense, how do those styles generally match up? How do these styles specifically match up in the game? And I want to see that. That's the flow of the game that I want to see. Who's imposing their will on the other one? Who's actually making the other one react to them? Whose game plan supersedes the other teams? You never know which way it's going to go in some of these matchups. Then I'm analyzing systems. I'm looking at what is the structure of how the team works. Not just the style, the pacing, the level of aggression, how the user play. What is the system? Who is the star player? What are the roles the other players play? How does the team look when everything's working really well? How does it look when it's a bit more dysfunctional? I'm analyzing those components. And so within that framework, I'm being able to tell, in the context of their own team as well as the game, how well is a player doing? How is he impacting the unit itself and its chances for victory? Then I'm analyzing individual matchups, and these tend to be the stars. And I'm trying to figure out, even if a star had big numbers, did he impact the game well? Did he win the game for this team? If a star did badly, but did he have impact kills? Did he make key plays? Then I'm also going to obviously the secondary players and doing that. Then as a final component, and yeah, it's become a trademark of mine, I've focused on the map strength and the map pool of the teams. And that's about knowing the history of the maps. That's about knowing how they think about the maps. And then it's about knowing how they're going to match up on those maps. And this is a key element because it's not just about knowing the record. It's not about knowing that a team's 6-1. It's not about knowing that they won on this map 2 weeks ago. It's about knowing why they're 6-1. It's about knowing what they do and what they like about the map that allows them to be able to beat this specific team and to be able to go head to head with them. It's basically about a kind of qualitative analysis and modeling actually of the team's philosophy, their approach to why they pick that map, how they play that map, and then how they apply their system through their style onto that map against this opponent. And so there's a history in Counter-Strike especially of people not being good at that. Go back and watch the early majors, those ESL majors that I wasn't at because of all the Poland shit. Go and listen to the map pick ban veto sections and they're a fucking nightmare. There's people who are guessing and saying, I wonder what Fnatic's going to ban here in an era when Fnatic's permaban is nuke. Who are going, I don't know. I think like Virtus Pro could ban Cobblestone here, or and then someone going, do you think they'll ban Dust 2? And like Dust 2 is the permaban of Virtus Pro. People didn't focus on it back then. Fans didn't know it back then. Fans didn't have it set. Part of how fans have it so set now is because I've focused on it so much. I've made it such an emphasis that they've watched a lot of the games that I've been involved in. So now everyone has a basic dictionary of, we know that Astralis started off super good on Train and Overpass. And we know that Virtus Pro are a classic Mirage team. And they used to be good on Cash, but don't play it anymore. And we know that the guys from NIP aren't going to play Mirage. They don't play it. These things, I've helped establish the narrative in this sense. And thankfully, that's why it seems obvious in some regards, because I've done a good job of getting it across to people, articulating and making them see. Now, the one part I don't always do a great job with, which is the hardest part of my job, it's what I'm always working at, is figuring out to explain qualitatively why they're good on that map. Why they're even picking that map. That's why I always go to the philosophy of, they go with comfort when they're against this kind of opponent and they don't feel like they can win against this kind of opponent. Virtus Pro will actually try and bully them and intimidate them by letting them play a strong map, beating them on it, showing them they can win there and crushing them and winning the mental game. That's a key emphasis that I have. Not just they're going to pick Train because they're 6-1 in it and the other team is 2-4. That's not the way I analyze the maps. And I think this is a key area. Yes, it's very niche. It's not all the game. It's a small part of it. But it's a way that I can set up the framework that other people like Janko can come in with the tactics on Train and then what they did there. And you notice all of my approaches here, in terms of the stylistic clashes, the system analysis, individual matchups, the map pool, record history, that's an area where only I really do those things to those degree. Other people don't in their analysis. And so that's my style of analysis. So yeah, my analysis is very different from other people's. I also think that one of the things we've done with analysis in CSGO is we created room for the commentators. Now they have a space where they don't have to analyze the game in that respect. They stay in the moment of the round and the match that they're in, and they analyze that, and they talk about that, and they discuss that, and they leave the rest to us, and we pick up the baton from there, and we go further with it, and we break it down, and we go into depth, and we set up the storylines. One of the things I love about CS is that we have a really great chemistry between casters and analysts, where if I bring up an interesting point, or I set an interesting question to someone, I'll often see like Sadakist or Henry or Anders or Semler actually start the cast by saying, yeah, actually, well, as Thorin was saying there, the past times they've played Cobblestone against Gambit, they've actually been able to play very well and they put them under pressure. So what's going to happen now? Is this the reason why, they'll use that to then go into what they're doing and they'll keep those storylines present. And so that's why I feel like there's a clear inherent merit and value to what we're doing on the analysis desk. There's also the fact that you actually need different types of analysis. First of all, to give you a holistic picture of the game and different ways of thinking about it. Secondly, to balance the desk. It would be terrible to have the best analyst ever on strategy, but 3 of them and each go turn by turn and all be talking about similar things or just the same type of analysis, it wouldn't be a balanced diet, as it were. So when I work with YNK, Yanko, and I learned how good this guy is at breaking down rounds and remembering a key round and what was different about how they execute it normally, I was like, I even said to him, literally, I'm going to give you all the time to do that. You're going to do all of that, and I'm never going to do any of that. And in general, if I ever do a little bit, it's only going to be to throw it to you to give a more in-depth or a contrasting opinion on it. And so, as a result, I then said to him, similarly, later on, I want all the time for the map veto, and I want to get the basis on this, and this is how we'll divide it up and balance it out. If you had 3 Yankos on a desk, it would be terrible. It would be a really bad desk, but it'd be very different from why a desk with 3 Thorins would be very terrible and wouldn't be good. And all of these would be different from the fact that if you had 3 Moses on a desk, it wouldn't be terrible. It would be good. In fact, he could do all these aspects to a degree, but you know what? It wouldn't be the best desk. Because he couldn't do my part as well as I can. He couldn't do Yanko's part as well as he could. He could do his own, and he can do some of our jobs. In that sense, he's a very talented guy. But it would be a good, but not the best desk. Now, if you have Yanko, Thorin, and Moses on a desk, now you've got a great balance. Now you're going to get all different aspects. Now we've worked together so much, we're going to play off each other so well, and we're all doing our jobs, and you're getting this bigger picture of the game. And to me, that's what's successful about these desks. I mean, when I have different lineups on desks, I try to play a different role. I try to give up some aspects or take up the slack in certain areas. I've actually kind of, in that sense, even though the host in theory should be the leader, some of the hosts don't take that role. I've tried to be a leader in that respect and figure out what these guys need and work with them and figure out how to set them up sometimes when I know that they've talked to me in the green room about something, but they're not bringing it up on the desk now and the host hasn't clued in to get it. Maybe he wasn't there at the time. And I try to set them up and I try and make a point that I know they'll react to. And sometimes that means I make the point, in a foreign manner, that's very provocative in a very certain blunt way. And I think this person's shit. And I know they're going to come in like, but I actually think, the way he looks, it's like if the team had done their job. See, now, if you don't like what I said, but you liked what he said, you actually have to thank what I just said as a result of getting that out of him. It was never going to come otherwise. I know you can't know this if you're sat at home. It's very difficult to know what goes on behind the scenes and the mechanisms of how something works. You just know if you like the individual part. But you have to understand in this sense, it is holistic. The individual parts feed into each other, cause each other, and build into the overall structure. You can't just take one of the cards out of the bottom of the house of cards and hope that it's all just going to stand up in this respect. It won't. It all comes collapsing down. So if you like the house of cards, you got to like those elements that make up it, even if in isolation aren't your cup of tea. I'm also just not trying to be an expert in that way. I'm never trying to be a Yanko. That's not me. That's not my life. That's not my experience. And that's not what I get off on. That's not the stuff that interests me as much. That's the stuff that's for him. Even if you say you're not trying to be an expert, if you're someone who's been around the game for more than 10 years, presumably you've studied it closely, you've thought about it a lot, you have strong opinions, surely to some degree you are an expert. I mean, the big problem here is obviously the definition of an expert. I mean, as you'll see, whenever I talk about any of these topics, people get drawn into semantics. And as soon as they decide that this is what a symbol means, and it can only mean this, and it means this, and therefore the identity is built around that because this is this, and everything else is not this, and in contrast, its identity is based on this. As soon as people get into that, you're going to have arguments. You're not an expert. You're not an analyst. Why? Because you don't do exactly this sort of analysis that I call analysis and not exactly this sort of expert that I think is an expert. Yeah, I get that. The point is we have to look at the definition. So yes, for what some people who are critical's definition of an expert or an analyst is, yeah, I'm not. There's not enough time in the day for me to do that. It's not my inclination to do that. It's not the way I see the game or model it. It's not my perspective. It's not what my history and experience inform me towards. It's not the way my brain works. And more importantly, there's other people who do that better, and we have a relationship where they do that and I do something else. So I have different definition of if you notice, I have a very loose term of what analyst and expert can mean so that it can fit all these different styles that we can go from. So personally, for me, my analysis, my expertise when it comes to doing desks is trying to come up with the best ideas I can that I think are worth talking about now in the context of what's going on, and then expressing them in a manner which gets them across, hopefully, to the audience. Now, that might be getting it across in a serious manner, or in a manner that's conversational, or it might be in a fun manner. That might be the sugar that makes the medicine go down, doing it in a banter way or a provocative way. But there's always a point to it. It's very rare I ever make a joke that doesn't actually have some analysis tied to it, because that's how I think up my jokes and my banter. I'm thinking of the analysis, and then in doing so, I think of a joke or a funny way to say it, and that's why I say it in that way. I never do just out of nowhere just go, Dennis from Mouse Sports is shit, haha, and then just leave it like that. No, It's some sort of point of what's happening in the game, or what do I think will be a problem here in the game, or why do I think Nico could carry in Mousesports but they had issues. There's always somewhere that it comes from. That is analysis and is my level of expertise informing what might even be a joke in that particular example. Now, there's also the fact that because I'm putting so much of my effort into the ideas and expressing them, like, I'm not someone who plays games a lot. I'm not going that approach of playing the game the most, knowing all the secrets of the game, knowing the expert tactics of the game. That's not the type of expertise I'm going for. Like, it literally is the case that in the time that other people who do analysis are playing games, I'm watching games. I'm working on esports. Working on esports is my game. My game's not Counter-Strike. My game is working on esports about content about Counter-Strike. That's my game. That's what I put my time into and work on and put more effort into. And yeah, within that, I watch games, but then I have to watch the games that help me do my job, that help me explore my ideas, help me build up my expertise in my very niche area. I've always said this, and I'll say it again. I would rather go and watch a classic final or a very recent important match that seemed very pivotal again and again to get something new or think about it a different way than watch a random online game or a group stage game from a tournament I didn't watch yet that wasn't that big a tournament. I would never give up one in favor of the other. I feel like that's a more valuable use of my time for what I'm doing as an analyst and for my job and as a person in general. I like to learn. This is a concept I came up with a while ago and really kind of figured out how to articulate. I want to find the essence of a player. And since in general I care mostly about the great players and the great teams, I want to kind of figure out what they're about, what their style's about, and I want to learn their philosophy on the game, how they think about the game, what their mindset is. I want to model their style. What sort of an overall archetype of style do they fit into? What are their different nuances within that? What are their strengths as a player? How do I model that and then in contrast to others? What type of a player are they? You can view these from a high and a low resolution. From a really high resolution, right, Fur is an aggressive player who likes to have autonomy, and he's to some degree has some wildcard nature in him. Like, plays within the system still, and his strengths are like fantastic AK spray and bursting, and very aggressive in terms of the peaks that he'll take, likes to take chaotic initial peaks there because he's so good. But if I'm going at a lower resolution, that means that in this case, if I have time, I've studied Fur more in depth. I'm like, right, and on this spot, he plays it like this. And you notice he'll make a gamble at this point, depending on how they reacted earlier in the game. Then when his team's getting ahead and they're rolling, he'll play in this more conservative manner while he's within the system. But when they actually need a break and they need someone to make a play action, they'll kind of set up for him to... That's the lower resolution. The higher resolution's up here. I don't know which way around that analogy. I'll have to figure that one out to figure out the terminology correctly. But the point is, that's kind of the way I'm viewing these players. And I did find out that as I studied a lot of players, if you study 100 demos of a player, and you're someone who has the way my mind models the game, what I found was in the first 10 to 15 games, you'll learn 90% about that player. And you study the next, 85 to 80, and what you'll find is a lot of it just confirmed even more so. And then, yeah, you'll find some nuances beyond that, but not a lot of them will be applicable or be able to use in analysis or an article or something. It'll be too detailed. Whereas if you learn the right 15 to watch out of the 100, not just the first 15, you just watch 15, but the right 15, you can cover the whole gamut of games he did well, games he did poorly, games against this type of opponent, games where he was in a system, games where he played without a system, games with good teammates, games that. If you do that, you get most of the essence of the person. So it saves time, allows you to look at more players and more games and more esports. And that's something that I think I've really, to some degree, mastered, but I'm still always working on it to try and figure out more questions to ask and more little details to get more out of less games. Because watching 1,000 demos for all these top teams is not viable for anyone unless you just want to only be an expert on SK Gaming and CSGO in 1 year. It's not going to work for a whole career and for higher level and low level resolutions. So I think I have different ways of seeing the game. And in that sense, I have expertise in that respect. And when I see other people with different expertise, you'll notice a general theme of my career has been I try to amplify their voices, get them out there. I'm not trying to become them. I'm not going to become them. But I want people to see, yeah, I enjoy this. It's different from what I do. And it's a diverse job. And having a very diverse set of skills that I've built up over time, yeah, it can be a limiting factor because I have to work in many other games and do different podcasts and interviews and be my own thoughts and write articles. Yeah, that's limiting. I can't just be the one expert who only watches the demos and only does desk analysis. That does limit me to a degree, but I can get good enough within it thanks to using my time efficiently that I've been able to, I think, become some type of an expert, not necessarily the traditional definition, and certainly do analysis. I just come at analysis from a different place as other people. So a major component of what has been so compelling
about your work as an analyst has obviously been this notion of banter, of making jokes or making statements in a provocative manner that provoke response, an emotional response often from people, other people to give their opinion in contrast and in response. What's going on with banter? Why does that play such a prominent role? And what do you see as the role of banter within this job?
Yeah, I thought this was something that would come up. So the thing about banter, I actually came to an epiphany about banter, which is essentially it's not just for fun. That is what it is on its most base level. It's a joke. It's a funny comment. It's a witty remark. It's a way of phrasing something. Yeah, it's all these things, but it could also be used in a very beneficial way for the broadcast, because it's not only entertainment, so people enjoy that, and it's a different flavor, but it can be a very special kind of filler. And so what happens is sometimes in a tournament, you have to fill. And you've already talked over the match, and to go back into the in-depth stuff would actually be to let the hype for the match die out, and you need to come out for a minute. So then when we get told that's often when I put on banter mode and I go into some jokes and add in some things and we wait till the time. Then we bring the game back up just before, and we go back into the game with the actual analysis, and then we go into the match. So we're maintaining the pacing, maintaining the excitement level for the match so people don't get burned out and feel as though it's all died out before the match happens. Then there's banter in as much as you can use it to balance out the entertainment otherwise in the tournament. Like, yes, a match can be very entertaining. Plays of individual players can be very entertaining, but it's very variable, right? Some games, it looks awesome on paper, doesn't turn out to be that great. Or it looks terrible on paper and turns out to be terrible on paper. It's a massive favourite against a massive underdog. They slaughter them. It's not competitive. It's not even high-level Counter-Strike because the better team just coasts. When you come back for analysis there's not that much analysis on an in-depth expert level or how we would normally analyse. That'll be interesting. That'll be entertaining. So this is where I tend to try and fill in more banter and to make it more fun and to make points, but make them in a fun way and make it so that the entertainment, in that case, it can't come from the match. We're going to have to fill in. We're going to have to do the banter, do the entertainment, and that's going to give a great atmosphere and a great broadcast and keep people watching the broadcast. Now, the problem with this is, yes, when it's a really serious match and a really big match, there's not going to be as much. And so that's how I've kind of learned the formula of how much banter to put in. For big finals like the Major, you don't really see that from me. I don't put a lot of it in. It is about the game. The game will provide the moments. It has the spectacle. All eyes are on that. It's about the game and the players in that moment, but not always at all times in a tournament, especially these long tournaments where you have 30-odd games in the group stage and then matches that aren't as competitive until you get deep in the tournament. There's also the fact that, as unfortunately just the case, that not everyone should do banter. Not everyone can do it. I mean, especially not in the manner that I do it. It's got to fit your persona, and it's got to work within the moment and work with who you are and who you're actually working with on a desk and what the context of the event you're at and who the players are and whether they're liked or disliked. Like, one of the big problems is a lot of the people who are good analysts and casters or community figures who try some banter like that, they do think that you just come up with banter out of nowhere for no reason and you just make a joke that's a little bit mean about someone. No, like I say, it has to come from a place where it's informed by real analysis or a key point, or you're using it to fill in a moment where the audience think you're just wasted everyone's time, but actually you're filling everyone's time that's being wasted by the game not being ready yet, or a technical problem, or the fact that they can't throw to the casters because someone of them's got a problem with his headset. And yeah, this is a way to distract people for a moment and entertain them, and it's filler. Sure, a lot of it's not going to be classic shit, not all of it's going to be in highlight videos forever, but it's a way to have fun and to keep the events good. And that's a key thing that actually I think banter can serve a very meaningful purpose in tournaments itself, beyond just being a funny joke.
Whenever you're talking about jokes or banter, or whatever you want to term it as, there's always going to be this discussion using this very set terminology of the line. Is there a line? Have you crossed the line? Is there a limit to what can be said? Limit to what should be said? What is your sense for this?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is always obviously the thing, right? People want to know, like, have you crossed the line? Don't you know where the line is? In a pure sense, I don't think there is a line. I think you can joke about anything. I think it's all just playing with ideas. I think usually the mechanism of how a joke works isn't even the specific detail of the ideas. It's how they interact and your expectation of what was going to happen and what happens instead, or the fact that sometimes that is fulfilled in a way that's satisfying. There's a lot of mechanisms to comedy. As someone who's studied quite a lot about stand-up comedy, because it's an area that's helped me with banter, etc., that people won't know. Because again, people only know how they react and how they enjoy the product. They don't know how the sausage is made, as it were, to use that old famous idiom. So yes, there are exceptional cases where someone who you can't know, who's out there, who just happens to be in the audience, is hurt or offended by something. Because oftentimes these are the ones I actually care about to some degree, because there's some really subjective, specific personal experience that happened to them. And you can't know that happened or how it happened or the circumstances, but it just so happens it doesn't work for them and that upsets them. Now, that's very different from people who it's nothing to do with that. They just think, oh, you shouldn't say that. Oh, I've decided that since this other person over here got in trouble in a totally different circumstance for saying something similar, you can't say it either. And since I've decided you can't say it, by saying it, you've outraged me, and now I'm going to demand that you be fired, or this is unacceptable, or that you're a piece of shit as a human, I'm going to judge you. Those people I don't care about at all. We're not going to talk about them. That's irrelevant. Yes, the other person I acknowledge, just as like someone could make a dark joke in a comedy club, and someone, unfortunately, who sat there could have had a very similar experience recently and they didn't think that was going to be brought up when they went to a comedy club. It's brought up and it makes them upset. Yeah, that's unfortunate. And unfortunately, they are just a casualty. The rest of us have to be able to enjoy comedy, and you have to say things that to some people could be hurtful, could be offensive, could be dark. It's just not their cup of tea, but it's enjoyable to the other people and it has significance to them. And so that's why you can't have a hard line, and there is no set line as to what is acceptable and whether there's a limit as to what you can say. There's also the fact that it's irrational to think you could perform entertainment, especially creative entertainment, especially impromptu, just, like improv, making stuff up in the moment, improvisational, and have in mind all possible people and what they could have experienced and what they're thinking. And you can't know all these things. It's irrational as even a mindset of thinking about something on a broadcast. You can't do that. Instead, you have to do what you can with what you've got, make up things that are fun, be creative. I mean, it's like going beyond the pure sense. In a practical sense, it's like asking someone, what is something worth? Like, people can complain all day that these trainers are too much or that they've really ripped off for the quality what they cost for these headphones over here. But in reality, we surely understand that the practical terms of the line for what something's worth are purely arbitrary and variable. I mean, it's worth what the market's willing to pay for it. And you don't always know that going into it, right? And you launch a product and it fails. You launch another product, turns out you could have charged more for it. And then you charge a lot for something that isn't actually that great quality, but you do great marketing, and so people buy it and people want to pay for it. Therefore, in a relative sense, it's worth that, right? It's the same in terms of the line, in terms of what's funny, etc. I mean, it all depends on what day it is, the fucking time, the kind of audience that you've got, the current climate politically in esports, the current climate in the wider world, and what people are feeling about those things. These are all very difficult things for one person to know, to keep in mind, and then to somehow use as a limiting factor or inform how he then makes a joke up in the moment. That's pretty unreasonable to expect. Now, if he was writing a long essay about something, yeah, you could say, hey, be more thoughtful of that, or didn't you read back and ask yourself that? He doesn't have time to do any of that in this particular sense. I mean, there is no hard line of what will succeed as a joke or what will fail as a joke. I mean, first of all, it depends who's saying it, what we think about them, and what we're then, as a result, expecting from them and willing to take from them. I mean, an element that you'll notice over my own career has changed, despite the banter not really changing that much in terms of the style or how I do it. It's not that I don't do the same kind of jokes. It's that people are used to it now. They kind of know me. They kind of know what to expect from me. They know the tone of how I say something. They know now more when I'm joking, at least it would seem, and when I'm being serious, whereas before they'd interpret jokes as serious and some outrage. They know that it's a joke as much more now. They know that other people like them, and therefore they can't necessarily stop it to the same degree. It's actually well liked, whereas when I wasn't that known, maybe they think they could go super hard and shut it all down. The key thing is, I actually think to some degree, I've benefited from what I'd call like the Charles Barkley effect. When Charles Barkley says something that people otherwise would be a scandal, or they'd say it's crazy if he said that. Because Charles Barkley, that's just what happens, that's just what he does, and that's just his perspective. People go, even if it's really crazy, whereas they might be outraged otherwise, because they know Charles Barkley's history, they go, it's just Chuck. Yeah, that's just what Charles Barkley does. Yeah, that's what Chuck does. Or they write it off and, yeah, whatever, it's just Charles Barkley, and who cares? I think to some degree I've gotten that, and part of that is people getting used to me. Like, I get so mad when fans criticize a commentator, a new commentator, then a year or two later they go, you know what, he's really improved, and I think it's because of how we criticized him. Because in 99% of cases, I can tell you, someone who did that job myself and has been friends with these people, it's not. First of all, yeah, they improve themselves, but a lot of how they improve is very nuanced. You wouldn't be able to see what they did. Secondly, it's not due to people's criticism. And thirdly, often what changes people's minds isn't that you overarchingly, retooled your whole skill set. It's that, again, they got used to it. They're the ones who weren't accustomed with you and didn't know how you did it and hadn't learned to like it and all these sorts of things. And now they love it. And now they really like it. And now they think you changed, because to them, the experience is different. They don't realize they changed. They became accustomed to you. They adapted to you, actually, not the other way around necessarily, even if you did change things over the time, because obviously a professional tries to improve. Now, there's also the fact that, yeah, to some degree, I have not the same limitations. Before, if people got upset, they had a channel through which they could go to express that beyond an opinion. And maybe they could get me fired, or they could get me in trouble, or they could fuck with my job in some way. I've since structured my career, ever since being fired from OnGamers, so that that can't happen. So that I have so many different things I do for so many different games, for so many different people, for things that I own myself, things that I do for hire for other people, things that I get money in this respect, things where I could do more of those types of events, or I could do more work for this guy, and I don't, and I balance it all out, that if any one of these pieces goes out, I can increase my focus on the others, or I can go solely into one of them, or I can go to a different game. I've structured it so that I don't suffer the same consequences. And actually, I think that's also taken away some of the sting for other people. For whatever reason, it was the fact, bizarrely, that I worked for some big company that they thought made it even more unacceptable that I said X and Y. Whereas now, they know that I don't. I just do that for a freelance basis, and actually my work that I own is my brand. And it's precisely telling you that it's going to be like that, and it's going to be my opinions. So to some degree, I guess the expectation filters are different in terms of what they expect. So that has worked in that kind of a particular respect. There's then the fact that sometimes when we make these jokes, especially on desks or on Twitter, we're just filling time. We're just having fun. We're making a throwaway comment. We're just trying to make people laugh, right? We're not saying something super serious that needs to be analysed and studied and pored over for years. I mean, comedians, even successful comedians, don't kill it with every joke they make. Even if the audience love them or want the joke to work, it doesn't work with every single one. I mean, especially when they aren't well known. They can make what would be great jokes that don't go down well. They can make a great joke and then a terrible one that that's ruined the whole mood, hasn't it? When you're just riffing, when you're just improvising, when you're coming up with shit, you don't have time to check it. It's coming up in the moment to your brain and out through the mouth. That's it. You can't backspace in your head halfway through the sentence and just say nothing. You can't say half of it halfway and then suddenly start to analyze it as you're saying it and go, actually, yeah, I'm not going to say that. It ruined the whole act. You've got to commit. Once you start to do it, you do it. And so, yes, there is a lot. It's a very difficult thing, and it is all about how people feel, but it's about everyone being on the same frequency. And when you hit the right current, the right frequency, it works and it's magic. And when it doesn't, even though it comes from the same place with the same intention, with maybe even the same execution, it goes totally flat and it looks like it's terrible. And people go, that's the line. Why did you do that? Just don't do that part. Do all the other parts that we like. Just don't do that. And then you'll be acceptable. Now I will accept you. You can't. You've got to take the bad with the good in that respect. They're two sides of the same coin. I mean, people who look at these good jokes and bad jokes and think there's a key defining characteristic. They're not. They come from a similar place. The intention's the same, maybe the execution is different, or the audience is different. People who I've noticed are very critical of banter as a concept are never people who are, banter as in the type they don't like and think's outrageous. They are never, ever people who do banter themselves and do it well. I've never seen somebody who was really good at banter, did it well, and yet had a very critical view of like, you shouldn't have said that, you should have thought more of that. I've never met that person. It tends to be people who, in their job, they don't do banter. They're not any good at it. So therefore, they don't understand the mechanisms here. The people who do, pretty much from talking to them, overwhelmingly understand this element, that it's a chance, you're taking a chance, it's very flippant, it's supposed to be disposable and be there for an instant, be gone in an instant. And the fact that it's not gone in an instant, and people take these things and study them forever and keep them and revive them over and over again and act as though that's something the person is saying every day of their life over and over again, that's the most important thing to them, that's disingenuous on their part. And that is dishonest the way they behave. And that sort of a person should not be given attention, quite frankly. And so I ignore them where I can. I mean, in general in life, I would say you should never take things from one medium to another and judge them by the rules of the other medium and what people think about that. Because that it ignores all the context. Like, how much time did the person have to think of what they said? What is the current expectation? Were they in a situation where they had time to correct themselves if they didn't necessarily get it out right? No. So treating a tweet or offhand comment like it was some published white paper essay on the topic that they'd spent years on, and this were all their conclusions, and they phrased it exactly how they want, that's just disingenuous in itself. And so again, that sort of person who's going to be that silly, I don't think they should be treated with respect. In the past, there's no way of avoiding it. You have been known for certain, what should we call them, problems? Some people might call them scandals in the modern age. There was the one where you made comments about Poland prior to going to EMS1 Katowice, the second CSGO major, which led to you being fired from that event before you ever appeared on camera. Then you've got the situation during an episode of Summoning Insight where you're working for OnGamers and you made a comparison between Reginald and a character from Planet of the Apes, which people
took this to be racism. People thought that this was out of line. This is an unacceptable comparison. What is your take on these past problems? And do they still, they often come up in discussion. You'll see them in threads. Do they haunt your career to a degree?
When people describe, you knew this was going to come up, right? Cheers, mate. So when people describe my past problems as though there's some big scandal that I was involved in, I have never done anything in my career in esports, in my life in esports, so beyond my personal life, that anyone could look at and actually claim on any objective level is morally reprehensible. I've never stolen anything. I've never conned anyone. I have never lied about anyone publicly. I've never had anyone fired or fucked with their job in any way. And yet, when these sorts of incidents are brought up, I'm treated like some villain, like some sinner with a scarlet letter that is forever tattooed upon me and can never be removed and should always be brought up as special context to show what I'm like as a person. Now, I will say, yes, people aren't going to like the things I've said or done. That's fine. But one of the things that I actually think is the impetus behind why people react so vehemently against these things and why it stirs up these feelings again is I actually think it's an extreme version of what happens if you do a typo on the internet. So if you do a typo, someone who read what you said and totally understand what you mean, because in most cases the brain can understand what's meant anyway, and someone who knows exactly the sentiment of what you said, and someone who might even have an opinion on the sentiment, in so many instances, they will just tell you that you did a typo. Like, oh, it should actually be spelt this way. And so the fact that in this sense, what you've said, assuming it didn't have some morally reprehensible nature or some ill intent, this is where people have taken the intent to be differently and decided that they can decide what the intent was. It's that you've misworded it, or you haven't explicated it well enough, or you didn't get across the intent well enough. It didn't translate. Now, when they get to point out that this is wrong and the way they're interpreting it, your intent, this is a terrible thing you've done, you can't say that, they get to feel superior in the same way the guy that tells you what the typo is, he thinks, I wouldn't have spelled that wrong. That's the same thing. Now, to me, that sort of behavior says a lot more about the people in question than the individual making the statement they're responding to. Like, just think about this recent thing that happened where Skadoodle, the Cloud9 AWPer, was ill with potentially a dangerous illness. And so I made a tweet where I said, like, get well soon, Skadoodle, like one of the all-time great AWPers in CSGO. And this player Config, who plays for North, told me to shut up and then started saying about how I was obviously insulting Skadoodle and then started saying all this stuff which actually shows no consistency to my career, that I've like actually mocked people's personal situations before. And so this is a trend with me. Not in any way, actually. I've mocked their game and things about their public persona. Never serious things about people's health. And the whole thing, in all the public discussion about it, didn't become about the fact that Config was wrong about my intent and actually probably owes me an apology. It didn't become about the fact that I'd said nothing wrong in the first place and that was entirely reasonable what I said. The entire public court of opinion was a big judging panel of people using this as an instance to tell everyone what they think about me as a person and how I behave and judge how I behave and say what's acceptable for me to do and what I deserve in life and how I should be treated and all this sort of stuff. That's all coming from them. That's had nothing to do with me, what I've done. And I think that's a perfect metaphor for some of the response to some of this shit. I mean, it's a widespread issue right now in the wider world. I mean, in the age of social media, unfortunately, it does come with the territory of the world we live in and being well known. That doesn't mean it's reasonable or it's the way that I think things should be, but it's just the way things are. So in general, I think the approach to take is you live so as not to let it affect you too much. I mean, as I mentioned before, I've changed career components so that it can't impact me as much. I think in general, don't let people who have a ridiculous worldview or are doing unreasonable things and demanding you justify, don't let those people influence you too unduly. Like, I haven't done anything outrageous. I accord it the appropriate amount of time, the appropriate amount of attention. Sometimes I'll answer about it. Sometimes I'll reference it. Sometimes I'll joke it myself even and embrace it and actually turn it into something that I can use as a way to inform my persona. When you've made mistakes, you can move on past them. When you've done things that people just didn't like, that's not the end of the world. You don't owe those people an apology. You don't have to justify to those people that their intention was wrong. It's up to you what your intention is. You can communicate that if you choose to. People take totally the wrong tack. Those sorts of people I find explaining it doesn't help with. Like actually one of the big mistakes I did make in my career, not a huge one, but I just look back and it was a waste of time. It wasn't a good idea, was actually publishing these long commentaries on these very problems, the Poland thing and the Reginald thing. Because in those situations, I don't think they justified huge explanations. I don't think people could demand of me that I explain to them why I'm not a racist or a bigot or a xenophobe. I don't have to do that. I also think it didn't help in any way with most of those people. In fact, if anything, they then used the fact that I'd done that as the fact that I was justifying myself, and therefore there was some seed of truth to what they'd said in the first place, which there wasn't. So now I've put it back down to the very throwaway manner. It was a disposable few things I said. Some of them were jokes. They were all taken the wrong way. People treated things that I explicitly said as jokes as serious comments, which they never were. And so that's the level I treat them at. They weren't, and no one could affect me, so I'm not bothered. Move on.
A curious aspect of those past problems that we've been referencing, obviously, is that they were with ESL for the Katowice event, and they were obviously with Reginald, owner of TSM, in terms of the Summoning Insight incident. And yet you have since then worked with both ESL. You've done a major with them. You've done events with them. You've done work with Reginald actually since then. You've now had him on your show Talk to Thorin, where you spoke to him about the PA saga, and you did an interview with him about the visa situation and LCS. So you're working with, or have worked with, both of these parties. I mean, how did that come about? How do you bridge that gap? What does that mean that you're no longer at odds with them, or there's no longer some sort of clash that means you can't work with these parties?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's obviously one of the things that actually, in a weird way, revives these things, but also gives them a level of closure, right? Because what's bizarre is that, yeah, I have worked with ESL and Reginald since those incidents. So we'll start with the ESL one, because let's go chronologically. So the ESL one, first and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and say this. This is new information for some people. I do think that ESL, to some degree, set me up and actually behaved in a way that I consider quite disgraceful, on some level morally reprehensible, some of the people who were involved with that, which is that, yes, I'd said things that the public, it turned out when they heard them, didn't like and were upset about, and probably meant I couldn't do that event. So I've never argued, by the way, publicly, I've never said this once, that ESL shouldn't have fired me from the event, or shouldn't have said you can't work this event, or shouldn't have cancelled it, etc. But when I found out some things behind the scenes from people involved in the situation, multiple sources, about how they behaved, and then when I saw publicly how they behaved, yes, I do think they made it worse. Yes, I think they went out of their way to make this a much bigger thing than it was, and to make it a huge problem, where actually it was a fairly minor problem that could have been solved. So one of the things is, I always wondered, how did all those people find out about that? Because the storyline, the chronology is, I did that podcast something like 2 days before the event started. I did it on the, like, past midnight, 2 days, so I guess technically just under 1 day, but I did it at, like, 1, 2 in the morning, and then it's a show called it was a general esports show, and it was actually one that was mainly about StarCraft, but it included some other things about esports, and it had very low viewership. A lot of the episodes had a few thousand people watching, and it was mainly the StarCraft community watched. Like, CSGO people didn't watch it in general, and definitely people in League of Legends didn't watch it. And so I did it at, 2 or 3 in the morning, then I got up 5 or 6 hours later, maybe less than that. I traveled to Poland. I got there the next morning. Red Eye tells me, because of this thing that's gone down, all the crew's not going to work with you, and we're going to have to fire you from the event and all the rest of it. I think they even said something, please don't say anything publicly about this. Let us figure out the message we're going to send out. I said, yeah, no problem. I understand it all. I disagree with it, obviously, but if that's really the way things are, yeah, I don't want people to be upset at the event and to take away attention from the event. So, okay, we'll go along with all this. Now, the problem is, they then published this statement, and the statement essentially said that they'd fired me for this reason, and then it had this second part after the part about me, but it's all just about me and being removed from the event, where they mentioned that ESL, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was along the lines of, ESL does not tolerate xenophobia, racism, sexism at our events. It says all this stuff like that. And now everyone I know who read that statement took this as ESL saying, the first part's connected to the second part, I'm racist or xenophobic, or that's what they're decrying now. And the whole context of why they're decrying it is because I've just done this thing. I've said this thing and the public's found out. And so they're really throwing me out as this guy's the piece of shit. He's done all things wrong. Put him over here. We're sorry he can't work at our event, but that's it. And he's nothing to do with us anymore. And that really set the stage for what then was people's response to what happened in that particular respect. And people's response was very extreme, obviously. And people, ever since then, some people, very rare vocal minority, have behaved as though I was a racist or a xenophobe xenophobe or whatever else they want to claim. And now, my problem with that is not what those people think. It's that I think ESL did their part in helping that to be the case. And I think they really did, to some degree, scapegoat me beyond what I'd done in that respect and act as though I had done something racist and xenophobic. Now, here's what's amazing about that, is that years after the fact, Carmack, one of the head people of IEM, the IEM brand, other people from ESL came to me years later. And we're talking about years later. Like, this was last year before I started working with ESL again. And they said to me, wait a minute, we've never said you're racist or xenophobic. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, go and have a look at the comments you said in this statement. And they literally told me, no, we never meant that to be about you. That was supposed to be totally unconnected and just a general point about what we don't accept on desks. We didn't mean that you were racist or xenophobic. And then they even told me, no, I actually never thought you were. Like, I know, like the circumstances were bad. And in terms of the politics, it didn't work to have you on the event. But no, that's not what I meant at all. And I never thought you were racist or xenophobic. And I know, like, yeah, it meant that we couldn't work with you for a little while, but we always planned to hire you again. Now, the problem with that is, first of all, not only did their statement say as much that implied I was, but they had also many times after that come into CSGO threads where people brought up the idea that because I didn't work for ESL on those events, obviously it lacked some of my trademark banter and fun and wit and stuff. So people would always make it sound like, oh, ESL events are just too serious and boring. And I know Carmack and some of the ESL people hated that. And they used to come in there and be like, no, it's not the case. It's not that we don't allow jokes and banter. We just don't allow racism, xenophobia. And what he didn't understand, assuming we believe their story, which, whatever, I mean, we can go ahead and believe it. I think it's not a totally unreasonable story. It's just a very unfortunate coincidence, right? Is that they meant, again, that just as a general rule, they allowed people to banter as long as it wasn't over these lines. Now, they again claim they weren't implying that I was, even though, again, it's in the context of that's why people are discussing it. So you actually, in that scenario, funny that people are talking about my intention getting mixed up. In that scenario, if you really want people to think that, well, given an opportunity to, you probably should clarify that and say, oh, we're not meaning Thorin by this, by the way. Because everyone to this day, well, not to this day, but to that point, still thought that ESL thought I was racist and sexist and all the rest of it. Now, I will mention one other thing, and this might shock some people. But as I said before, I always wondered how so many people could be upset by that. Because remember, this is back in the day when Twitter still isn't as huge. Like, it's still pretty big in esports. But what happened was, I did that talk show, and like I said, the audience used to be like 2,000 or 3,000 on a VOD back then. And I remember when the thread came out on r/StarCraft for this show. And in the thread, before all the stuff with ESL firing me and the news came out, in the thread, I remember there might have been like 60 comments. Most of them were about other things discussed in the show. Funnily enough, I got DDoS on that show, so I wasn't on it very much. And it was about all the other stuff. It's like a 3-hour show, you know. But then there was like one comment that was like, ooh, that was a bit rough about Poland, wasn't it? Fucking hell. That was like it. There was no one like, this is outrageous, the racism and xenophobia. So an entire community read this, watched it, or at least the people who watched the show, the people in the audience, and didn't think that at all. They thought, oh, it's just banter. Yeah, it's just joking. Oh, it's a bit edgy, but you know, that's what Thorin does. You know, he's made those comments, whatever. I don't live in Poland. I don't go to Poland. What the fuck do I care? That's what they were all thinking, right? Now, how did all these people at ESL who are Polish guys who mainly speak Polish and not a lot of them are like fluent with English culture, how did they find that video? This is what I found out after the fact, is that supposedly someone high up in ESL saw this and themselves was outraged. And so what they did was they went and they got everyone else and they actually arranged a public viewing. This is late at night, remember, it's all happening with a span of 36 hours. They arranged a viewing for loads of the Polish staff, just people who were going to be working on fucking scaffolding and just like ushering people to seats and very basic things like stamp. And they showed them this piece of a video that they would have never seen themselves. Most of the public hadn't seen it, especially not the wider public. And they showed, so the audience was never everyone. And then they showed them this, and then they said, they finished after my section, they said, what does everyone think of this? Should we let this person work at this event? And obviously, those people were outraged. And they were like, you can't do this. Well, I'm not going to fucking work with that guy. He said that about Poland and he said that we're shitting on. And they went mental. So it literally was comparable to the scenario, I don't know if you know this, where the Danish cartoonists were killed by radical Muslims. Now, the reason why that was disgraceful is because if you know the story, that was published in a Danish newspaper. There was no one in Saudi Arabia, in fucking Syria, in Iraq, in Iran, in Afghanistan, who saw that newspaper, who has the circulation there, who knew about that. None of them did. The people who never, in the end, killed the person and had him killed didn't ever know or find out about that and would not have either. What happened was people from within Denmark who knew about this purposely took those cartoons and fakes that they created, took them to those people in those countries, showed them all, and that's where there was protests in the streets and people rioting and people going mental. And then people decided for religious reasons to, from other countries, have that person killed. Now, if you can't see how those people, those imams or whatever, played a key role in what happened in the outrage, and they actually were the ones offending other people by bringing them offensive material to them and helping incite it. And if you don't think that plays any role in the reaction, I'd say you're very naive and possibly a disingenuous, dishonest person. So I actually did have a big problem with that when I found out all that went down. Now, with that said, part of how this got fixed is this. Yes, I spoke to some of these people involved behind the scenes and publicly. Yes, I had a meeting with ESL last year where we figured out how we could potentially work together and talked over some of these problems. But there's also another aspect, which is, and this is a funny story, okay, to go with all the negatives, and those are a lot of people, by the way, who I haven't worked with since, and I don't work with, and they're not involved with me or this aspect of ESL at all, so it doesn't matter, they're gone at this point in the story. But there's a funny story where they actually told me that they had tried to hire me in the interim. They never had thought that I was going to be out of ESL forever and that I was just done for majors from them. They thought it was just going to be like one major, and then they'd hire me for the next one. And what happened was they told me this story that every time one of them, like there was a few of them in ESL that wanted me to work there again, and I would try and bring it up like, hey, is there any possibility, you know, for the next event, maybe we could like, I'm just floating the idea, could we have like Thorin back again? Maybe we could build a desk around like him and some other people and, you know, try it out. And apparently every time someone brought it up like that, in general, the feeling in the meeting was like somewhat neutral. Actually, some of the people were like, yeah, okay, like someone like, I don't really like him, but I get like, you know, obviously he's a big name now and it would help the event. And apparently on all the initial instances, every time the guy brought that up, like brought me up, someone would literally within the same meeting just to go like, look at this. And then they'd hold up like their phone with Twitter. And I would have just like 5 minutes ago tweeted something about like some huge problem that had happened in ESL, like, oh, fucking ESL, of course, with the corruption, expect those lies to do that, like something like that. And then everyone would be like, yeah, let's just drop that. And apparently one time it was even that it linked to like a tweet where I was calling someone like, you corporate bootlicker, like about like some like ESL guy. And then he was just like, yeah, I'm actually not going to go with that right now. But here's one of the funny things. When I had my face-to-face meeting with ESL, first of all, here's the key detail. It's a totally different group of people from the people with the Katowice stuff years before. So I'm not working with those people again. I don't ever have to get over my personal differences and some of the shit that those people did. That's not a problem whatsoever. We don't have to like each other. That's irrelevant. ESL 1 and IEM are very different brands. So in this particular sense, the key thing is, now I was working with some other people. So for example, one of them is Ulrich Schulze, the guy, the flying DJ. Now, funnily enough, he's a guy who, yes, I had a very antagonistic relationship with him on Twitter, where I thought a lot of the things he said were like ignorant or ill thought out or just stupid, and I thought representing ESL, they were ridiculous, and yeah, I banged on him pretty hard. But here's what's funny, actually, from meeting him in person, I have to say he actually gets a really unfair rep based on Twitter, because he's just one of those guys, and I think it's a German thing, unfortunately, where in person he's a very reasonable guy, he's a very amiable guy. He can listen to your points, he's not super hard-headed about things, he doesn't think he knows the best way. But I don't know why, but on Twitter just none of the nuance comes through, and people take, and the way he phrases things isn't always so articulate. He's trying to be honest and give you a behind the scenes thought on why they did something, and maybe sometimes he makes the mistake of speaking for other people within ESL or a general idea that he has that might not be how ESL in general thought of it, and that's mainly the problem. But in general, I actually think he's a guy where he's actually a pretty good guy. Like if people knew the other aspect of him, they wouldn't be as mad by some of his tweets as I was and as other people are, because we didn't know the context, right? So since then, I have worked at 2 big events with ESL, one major, one of the ESL 1 events, it was in New York. That wasn't a major. It's all gone great. They've been a good company. I think they are one of the bigger companies. I always used to praise the ESL Cologne events as some of the best, even when I didn't work at them. They are one of the better companies in esports. And I have to say that actually, since working with them, so since it's removed the vitriol element where if I was going to criticize them, I'd do it in even more emphatic language. Now it is the case that I have noticed that ESL themselves get a bit of an unfair rep. Like they do become kind of a lightning rod for any kind of corruption or incompetence or perceived corruption or incompetence in the industry, even when other companies are doing exactly the same or worse things, but those are beloved companies that have handled PR better. Because it's ESL, they're the ones that everyone bangs on the hardest. Now, I can get it in my case, because I had my own personal thing with them, where I'm going to focus on their doing videos about them more, because they've fucked with me, because they're number one, because they say they're the industry leaders, and I'm going to go more ham. I'm still going to make the same points, but I'm going to do so with, like I always say, I'm going to put a bit of mustard on the hot dog. It's not just going to be raw in that, well, not raw, but just dry in that particular sense and without as much flavour. Now, yeah, when I comment on the other people, first of all, it might not be as big, so I might not comment on them, and also I might not go as ham because I like them as a company, they haven't fucked with me in any particular way. So that's also part of the whole ESL thing. So the ESL thing, it's squashed as far as I'm concerned. It's in the past. If they do things that are wrong now, I absolutely critique them. I don't think they do a good job in some things. I think they do some things fantastically well. And I do think they're one of the best tournament organisers and do some of the best work in esports. And I think a lot of the things that people criticise about them are actually prevalent almost everywhere in the industry. Now, Reginald is a whole different issue. Because first of all, me and Reginald have never spoken about any of the stuff that went down there. It's non-existent to us. It was a minor thing. We moved on. It was a day in a life. That's it. No reason to ever bring it up. What's more, when that incident happened where I made this joke, we had no personal relationship. We had never had one. I think I talked to him like twice in person ever. Once to ask him to do an interview, which he just got out of and said he was too tired or something. This was years and years ago. And then another time, just at some event, and this is actually before they did the blacklist. So I never knew why I was blacklisted in the first place. I can only assume, because it's before some of the insight that I was blacklisted, that he just thought some comment I made in an interview was too critical, or maybe I'd interviewed too many CLG members who'd criticised TSM. I don't know, something abstract like that I couldn't have intuited what the reason was. Now, in the years since, I was blacklisted. They would never work with us or do anything. Whatever. My career continued. My career got more successful. I grew my influence. I did better work. I expanded it. Everything went great in my career. Having TSM or not having TSM was actually of no relevance to my life. It just meant I didn't get to do a Bjergsen interview. I didn't get to have Wild Turtle on some of the insight. Reginald never did any kind of behind the scenes interview. That's about it. Missed a few pieces of content. Okay, could have been some cool content. Wasn't. Just did the content with other people instead. But funnily enough, when they reached out, similar story to ESL. They figured out that it would be of benefit for both parties to work together. And once they realized that, and that it would also, as a benefit, reduce problems for them, so in TSM's case and ESL's case, then they reached out, they made the first move, they brought me in, they talked to me, they made sure there was no problems from the past, and then we worked together. Now, another reason why in both these instances I've been able to work with them is I'm not someone who lets personal shit get in the way of what I think is work I want to do and would be beneficial. So if I think it's worth doing an event, I want to do an event, the fact that someone was an asshole to me, as long as they can work in a reasonable manner now, I can look past that. Doesn't mean I'll ever like the person or get over that. No, to some degree, I'll probably always remember that. But I can put them out of the equation and realize it's not about them. It's about the event. It's about what we can do with this. So likewise, nothing's changed with me and Reginald. Don't know him very well. Don't particularly want to be friends with him at any point in time. Don't think we'll ever be friends, quite frankly. And disagree with a lot of the things he's done and said and the way he behaves and his philosophy. But you know what? Now that I can get some of his side, and now that I can work with him, now that I know his reasons for doing some of these things, it does shape how I think about it and influence how I think about him and his actions differently. Now, that's his own fault, by the way, that I couldn't think that way before, because I didn't have access to find out his side. He wasn't telling his side to anyone. He wasn't communicating with me. He wasn't engaging with my ideas and my work. And that was to his own detriment and to TSM's detriment. And actually, at a time, I think he'd even acknowledged this himself. In TSM, they had a culture which was, to some degree, unproductive for them. It was hostile to the media. It's hostile to people like me and anyone they saw as critical, and they weren't able to embrace that. And I think that's an area TSM has improved in massively, and particularly with me and Monty and others, that they've now finally been able to get past their problems with. Because if you look at some of the other people, I think this is where Reginald probably figured some of this stuff out. You look at Jack from Cloud9, the owner of Cloud9. You look at Liquid 112 and Team Liquid. These are guys where they absolutely don't like some of the things I say, don't like some of my work, don't like the tone of some of the jokes I make. They keep stum though. They keep it to themselves. They wait until it does benefit them to work with me, to when it can be a good thing to work with me, to when they like what I'm saying, and that's when they speak up. That's when they get involved. And at other times, they just let it go. They stay back in that sense. I've actually been very impressed with both of those individuals in exactly those senses, even though, again, as people, I don't know them, don't have a personal relationship with them, but they're very shrewd as businessmen and how they deal with things in that sense of understanding that. And Reginald's now come around with that, and he is a member of that group, and he now gets it, and therefore it's beneficial for everyone. Now, I will say, from talking to him, from doing work with him, yes, Reginald is a more complicated person than people may realise. His biggest problem, though, is still to this day, he's not that articulate. He's worked on it, he's trying to improve. And so his biggest problem is, one, not being super articulate, two, not engaging with the media in any critical opinion, and then three, when he does have something he wants to say, if he can't think of a great way to say it, or he thinks something's going to blow over, he tends to take the approach of just letting it die down and not doing anything about it. Now, that in general will allow people to think things for a long time or to have personal resentments. So actually, the interesting thing about both these people is you can see I have kind of won over personal battles, but not in a way where anyone lost. we all won. We all have succeeded. We're all benefiting each other mutually. It's better for everyone that we work together. And now there is no problem. And we can let the past be the past, even though it is very much what happened. And that doesn't change that, but we can build a better future.
Being as an analyst, yes, you only work in CSGO, you only appear on CSGO events, but for other games in your journalism part of your career, in the talk shows, with the Thorin's Thoughts videos, you do cover other games within the fields of those. So will we ever see you as an analyst, as an expert outside of CSGO, perhaps League of Legends or StarCraft, Dota, Overwatch, whatever it may be? Will we see you branch out? Will esports historian go and do analysis in a different game?
I mean, I did actually think quite heavily in the last couple of years about doing other games, because in terms of as a journalist, as you see in my career, I have moved from game to game, and I've tried out other games and seen if they fit for me and if my audience is there and if people vibe with it. And if they do and they don't, I move into that game. Otherwise, I don't. Like, it's obviously something that is going to be a part of my career. But as an analyst, yes, I had put a lot of time into it. Like, I had people from other organizations who were like, listen, I don't come from this game, or we're only doing some stuff in this game now, but we'd love to work with you in the future in this other game. What would you think about doing this role here? Or do you think you could do a desk work in this other game that you're not considered an expert in, or you've never done that role within? And yeah, it was something where a lot of these people, when I talked to them, actually they were like, yeah, I think we could do something in the future with this, even in games that you wouldn't expect from. And the reason is that in developing the entertainment aspect and in developing my own unique style of analysis, which isn't tied entirely purely to being an expert and about the X's and O's, the nuts and bolts detail of what happened tactically and strategically, it means that I can analyze and be a pundit and be a desk figure. And crucially, on those sorts of desks, I actually had a plan in mind, which was to ramp the banter aspect up even more, where what I would do was I would essentially have the rest of my desk understand the other people, that they would be experts. They'd be the people that you expect. I'd be there as like a trickster figure, as a provocateur who'd make my analysis, yes. And the whole point is I'd make my opinions and give my opinions that other people wouldn't give. And then they'd bounce off that. And then they'd reply, well, actually, I think that actually Haunts is the best top laner. No, actually, I think that actually at the moment, like Fenrir isn't quite living up to the standards you've set for him as a support, ever since he's changed teams. People in different games would be like this. And therefore, the other experts would express their expertise in a different manner and in response to me. And there'd be more fun and there'd be more spice. And there'd be an anti-hero, a villain, an antagonist injected in the desk, which would make the heroes even more heroic and people would love what they do. And they might not enjoy what I do, but it would have that Marmite, like love it or hate it quality to it. And it would be fun. It would be entertainment. So in that sense, I thought it could have worked. It might have happened. And if my career in terms of the journalism had gone a different way, in terms of being able to finance it and the opportunities, yeah, I might well have done it. And there were some opportunities on the horizon. But first of all, CSGO got bigger, and eventually all my schedule for analysis came to be CSGO. Now I've had to start turning down the events more. And where I am currently in my life, with where I want to live and what kind of lifestyle I want set up and how much of my work I want to be events and be journalism, at the moment with where CSGO's at as a game and its height, it just doesn't make much sense to do it. I might do it in the future and branch out, and there are obvious angles in my work that I currently do that you could see leading into it, and some other games that would like someone like me, because obviously I'm a very unique individual in that sense that they don't have in their game. They wish they had a Thorin, so hey, why not have the Thorin? There's a lot of opportunities where that could come up. But right now, in my life situation, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen, even though in an alternate timeline, it absolutely could have and would have, in fact.
You are someone who's known for having branched out into so many different areas with interviews or articles, obviously that kind of vlog type approach with the Thorin's Thoughts, giving your opinions, commentary at times in the past. What has the philosophy been behind this? Why go into so many different areas rather than just picking one, specializing on that, becoming known solely for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the old school, people just were in one area of one game. My job is I do interviews. Oh, I do written articles. I do analysis and playbooks of rounds. Oh, I make videos that are my opinions on things. Oh, I make commentary. People did one job, They didn't do all of them like I do, or they didn't do so many and move between them as they chose themselves. You also didn't have the mobility of opportunity and choice that you do now. For example, if you did commentary, you did it for one company, you were hired by that company, you were contracted, and you might only be working with that one and another one. And then if you did interviews and articles, you don't have your own channel, you don't have these. There's all these different aspects. So one of the things was, I came to this conclusion epiphany again, about what my job is, which is that actually I used to think my job was to make really good interviews that are in depth. And I used to think that my job was to do historical articles And I used to think that's my job, that's what I do. And what I realized as I developed my skill set and as I picked up other things from elsewhere in life is actually my job is developing ideas. When I have a good idea, that can become a question, something I'm curious about to ask someone about. When I have an idea that I think's worth explicating, that's worth articulating and outlining and adding in like elements of entertainment and interesting details and analogies, that might become an article. When I have a brief idea that hasn't fully been developed, that I want to talk through and I want to figure out and I want to put some spice into it with opinions and really characterize it, that might be a Thorin's Thoughts, that might be an opinion video or a column. If I want to influence what's going on, how people think of the game and how people characterize what happened, maybe that's commentary, maybe that's analysis. So what I had to do instead was my job is to develop the ideas. Then I've got to work on my skill sets, the different skills I have, to be able to figure out which medium does it fit. Should it be a short video of opinions? Should it be something that I use as a comment on a desk to really frame something and set up a key moment? Should it be something that is a long historical article and ties together as a skeleton all these different interesting aspects of the narrative and the person's match career, match play? Should it be an interview? Should I get all these things and actually let the other person fill in the blanks rather than me do it and let them put their information in there and have it just structure it? So finding the medium became my approach to my initial job, which is developing the ideas. And that actually requires a beginner's mindset. You've got to constantly be willing to reset, go into an area you haven't built up a skill in, start learning it, find ways that you can express an idea through that. And so in doing so, it developed different parts of me, it developed different skills, and it allowed me all this mobility in terms of my career and my interests to make them work in esports and not just be pigeonholed into one little thing. And as a result, by the way, earning a significantly lower amount of money. So I actually think that the reason why this is good is because since it develops a different part of me and lets me express myself differently, it's a lot of fun. It's really satisfying. Like, I think to work in esports, ideally, it should be a joy. The feeling of expression, of the soul at play, as it were, with ideas that you're interested in, experiences that you're having and have had, and ways that you imagine the world and can see the world and tell other people about. That's a lot of fun, to engage with people, to have ideas and to have back and forth and have fun. That's exactly what you'd want in your job and your career and your life. So the fact that you can tie it all together, I mean, that's incredibly fortunate for me, right? There's also the fact that actually becoming independent and deciding what ideas I even sell and what I own and where I use them, that in itself is quite an interesting concept, because I only got to that position due to a lot of setbacks and issues in my life. Things that otherwise could have crippled my career, could have put me in a situation in life where I was really resentful of people, could have made it so that I can't work for a certain site, or that I'm in a bad situation, or that my job's getting worse. And I used those setbacks because I had this mindset that I'm always trying to make the best of what happened, and that if something happened, sometimes you have to take the knock of doing something that you think's right and then it going a way that you don't like, and then move on and improve from there. In doing so, those issues and setbacks became almost the signposts pointing me in the new directions in my life that otherwise I may never have taken. Now, some of them I think I would have. I might have just gotten there later on in my trajectory, or I might have taken a turn and made a decision later because some things I was developing were heading that way. But often these abrupt moments of big problems, especially leaving sites, which often happened in a situation that I wouldn't have chosen, were what allowed me to then be propelled into the next aspect, where to rebuild myself and to go in the new direction, I had to put in a lot of work and learn a new skill, and in doing so became successful again. So I left all three of these sites almost unwillingly. I left SK Gaming because I had an issue with the new direction they had for the site, which then left me in the wasteland, but I got to work for Team Acer. There was actually, funnily enough, I don't need to go into the story now, maybe I'll tell it another time. Riot Games was actually in contact with me back at the time. This was in 2012, so long before all the stuff about toxicity and stuff, and they were potentially talking about becoming like a head person of content for them for esports. Luckily, didn't go down that path. I started working with Team Acer, and I managed to make them a pretty good brand for a team as their own rights, and did a lot of content for them and really developed stuff. And I have to say, there's a guy there who was a wonderful guy to work with, called Uwe, who actually, one of the things he did was he basically told me, he came to the conclusion himself, because I was doing all the grilled and all the articles, he came to the conclusion, you shouldn't even be the editor-in-chief. You should just be an artist over here creating your stuff. We'll have other people do the day-to-day stuff, and you just create in this way, and we'll support you. So that was fantastic, and he really helped develop me in that respect and let me do what before I'd had to do all the other work and then do this almost as a luxury because I'd done everyone else's work. Now I was able to focus on that. That was great. But then I only left them, not really out of choice, but because I got this fantastic offer from On Gamers, and that was was a step up in money and opportunity and the responsibilities that I would have. But I didn't leave On Games out of choice. I was obviously fired over some scandal over a tweet about Wild Turtle. It was an obvious joke. And in fact, was actually referential to a joke that we'd had before in esports. So without these issues happening, I don't know that I would have ever left some of those sites. I definitely wouldn't have left SK and On Gamers. Those are sites I planned to just work for the foreseeable future. I had no reason to leave. I liked the people I worked with. In general, I'd gotten used to the lifestyle. Yes, it was a lot more limited, but at the time, each of those jobs were the best job I had had to that point in time. So I never would have chosen to leave them, at least at that point in time. I would have kept working there for a while. So who knows where I would be now and if I'd have developed the same skills. I didn't have the same adversity in an alternate universe where I don't get fired or have to leave these sites. I mean, On Gamers particularly, that's a site where I could have been at that site for 5 years. I mean, I couldn't, it turns out, because it closed down a few years later. But if they'd been remaining there, I was getting a lot of work done. I had a lot of freedom. I also, believe it or not, because of some financial issues at the site, they were having problems in terms of some resources of sending people somewhere. And since I'd transitioned all my work as a result to be online, so I didn't have to have the resources, I was getting them the same amount of hits as anyone else, but for almost only my salary, essentially, no extra resources or expenses. So while the hard times were going on, where we were banned from Reddit, I really did put it on myself as a responsibility. Like, I've got to be the workhorse. I'm the only one who can do all this stuff. And I was thinking, because I knew some of the family situations, people had babies on the way, people had relationships they were getting, it was the best job they'd ever had. I was trying to work even harder, not just because I enjoyed it myself, which I did, but because I wanted to make sure these guys still have a job. So actually, when I got fired, that was my one big regret when I got fired from On Gamers, is the moment that I got fired in was one where the site couldn't afford to lose my hits and to lose me as a writer. And those other people, unfortunately, couldn't pick up the slack and make up for it. And sadly, I mean, this is one of the reasons I was annoyed at Slasher when he got us banned from Reddit the second time. I also knew that, you know, it's going to cost people their jobs eventually. It's going to set their lives back that this site will fail or that we can't live up to where we'd been going on our previous trajectory. And that's something that I didn't like, because I had hoped that I could play a beneficial role in delaying that or getting us out of that hole. I mean, I don't know that it was actually possible when I look back now, but I was set with the goal of trying and of doing the best we could. So then I went to my independent phase and I tried that out, and it was a big risk, but it worked out very quickly. And now I got to the point where that really, the start, it's like a gradual line going up to it, and then it's like it skyrockets. And since then, now I can do anything. Now I've got all the opportunities I could want. I mean, yeah, it's fantastic at this point in time. There's also the fact of why I've been able to move in these areas that I've adapted over the years. I mean, I'm not someone who thinks because I'm senior or I have a lot of experience or I've made more money than someone or I've interviewed more people and been to more events, that if they do good work, mine's automatically better than theirs, or that mine is better in exactly the same way. No. If someone comes in, and I found many people like this who are better than me in some area, I look at it, first of all, I enjoy it and celebrate it. And then secondly, I try to figure out, is there anything I can learn from this guy? Is there something about what they're doing and the way they're doing it that I could pick up and figure out, would this tool fit in my toolkit in some way? I mean, there's so many people who are better than me at these different areas, you know, like crafting narratives. I'm sure you can already think of some people. Expertise in the game, some of them that I'm never going to have. Technical writing ability, even. There's some people with fantastic ability to write. A writing voice, so compelling to read, so enjoyable to read. So I try to take what I can from them. Some of them I even have a relationship with, play a mentor role. I try to take what I can, try to give back, and just try to improve my stuff all the time and try and get it to a different type of level and make it more satisfying for me to make and for people to consume. So in general, the rule I've taken, this is why I've been able to move in all these areas, is because any area I move into, I do something in a unique manner to me. Because ultimately, the epiphany I came to, a conclusion regarding my job and how I could make it the best, is to make content that only I could make and in the way that I make it. So whether or not you think my article was the best, no one could have written it in the way that I write it and my opinions in that way. They could, if they tried to be a rip-off of me, they wouldn't be as good and it wouldn't be as successful. So that's the general approach I took. And I also, it's another reason I moved into some of these areas, because some of these areas weren't like making Thorin's Thoughts videos was never going to make me any money, seemingly at the time. Doing casting never seemed like that could be a full-time job because I'm doing the esports work on the side. A lot of these areas, articles obviously didn't seem like they could make much money because you could do one like one a month that was super in depth like that. It took a lot of time and you didn't get that many hits. But the reason I did them is because those are things I wanted to see out there. And so I learned the skills to be able to do them myself, because I can't sit around waiting for someone else to. No one would in some of these areas. So I made talk shows, even though I had no experience with on-camera work or being a host or doing talk shows in that respect. I did like my Mount Rushmore feature because there's people out there I wanted to see write an article about someone's career and define them, and they weren't doing it, and that's just not a player that we're interested in. So I do a Mount Rushmore. Now I can get them to talk about some of these players, and I can ask them questions about it. It's like a mini interview feature type article feature, something like a hybrid of the two. I could write columns because I want to see people's opinions. I want to get a hot take. I want to get a broader take on something. I want to have people's opinions out there, and thankfully some people have responded and do make more columns themselves. It's actually the reason why I did analysis in the first place, because I've always wanted events to be more epic. It's actually something that when I was out there in my self-imposed exile in the wilderness, not working for any big esports site, I noticed that to everyone else, they talked about esports getting bigger and how cool it was and how there was more money and how the competition was great, but they didn't make it more epic. They didn't put in any of the stuff surrounding it or talk about it in a way where it sounded like it mattered to them, like the history was important, like it was something more than just playing games in the basement of a hotel. They didn't make it sound like it was something epic. And yet, it doesn't matter what the setting is, it's how we feel about it and how we describe it. I came to the conclusion, actually, by watching the NBA, because I noticed in the NBA, okay, in other sports, sometimes the final of a big cup or something is in a special stadium that's only used for that, or it's in some huge venue and it's a special date. I noticed in sports like the NBA, where you play home and away games, you always are playing on your court and the opponent's court. Now, you play on that court in the regular season. You play on that court every round of the playoffs. So why is it something special in the NBA finals? Because you know what? Some people only make one NBA finals in their career. Steve Nash never made the NBA finals in his career. Some people play in a few NBA finals, lose them all, and they think back on it and they regret, and it did feel different when they were there. It's the exact same court they played on already. They played on that court their whole career. Why was it special? Because it meant something more. Because there was significance built into it. And that's what I wanted for esports. And I didn't care that back then we weren't in stadiums and people didn't get paid $100,000 a year and you couldn't win $500,000 and there weren't tournaments in every place. It didn't matter. What they did have, I could see that this could be more, and it already meant more to me, and I wanted to translate that to other people. So I had to learn these other skill sets and other mediums to express my ideas than just an interview, just a written article. So along with Richard Lewis, who we mentioned before, another name that is so often associated with yours, that you've worked alongside and has certainly been intertwined with your work over the last few years, is the League of Legends and now Overwatch commentator Monte Cristo, formerly of obviously OGN, and he's been on Riot Broadcasts, and now we see he's going to be working with the Overwatch League. So what is the relationship like with Monte Cristo? Like, is it working? Are you friends? How does that actually work behind the scenes, and what's going on within it? The bizarre thing about my relationship with Monte Cristo, with Monty, is that it came about in terms of actual relationship through pure synchronicity. It was not intended by anyone. What happened was I vaguely knew him. Like, I think I'd messaged him. No, actually, let me think. I forget what way around it was, but something had happened. Like, one of us, like, I think he might have replied to a comment of mine on Reddit or something, and then I might have tweeted at him or something along those lines, and he just said something simple like, oh, you make really good interviews. And at the time, he'd only just moved to Korea. He was actually doing his second ever season of OGN Champions. It was the spring season of 2013. And I just told him, oh, by the way, I'm actually planning on coming to Korea, and I'm going to come for like a week or something, or 2 weeks. And while I'm there, can you give me a hand in getting some interviews? Like, can you maybe tell me who to talk to at OGN or the contact info for some of the teams, and I'll contact them and ask them. And he told me, yeah, I'll go one better. Just stay at my apartment. And I went there and I stayed on the floor, which, by the way, in general, I wouldn't sleep on the floor at anyone's house now. I'm very picky about my sleep. But whatever, I did it. It was actually me. Chaos was there at the time, the old TSM AD carry. He was staying there. We saw the finals where sadly the Glorious Flame and Blaze did not win in expected fashion, but were 3-0'd. We had a crazy time beyond that. We had a lot of fun. And what happened was, in getting to know him, in talking to him, in spending time with him, he did my Grilled interview, if you remember my episode of that was from there, and I did a Grilled with him. In getting to know each other, even though he'd offered me a place to stay and he'd complimented, I didn't know him at all as a person. I'd never really talked to him privately. We hadn't had much of a discussion. And yet what happened was we had these discussions, and very quickly they had depth to them. They weren't just like frivolous, everyday conversations that just meant nothing. And what's more, we quickly found that actually a lot of our similarities went beyond esports, and in fact weren't about esports. They were about interests in bizarre, arcane subjects like alchemy or esotericism, or what we thought about Jungian psychology, or certain types of fiction. And the reason why this was very weird is I could have never known that about him. He could have never known it about me. But most people in esports don't have those kinds of hidden depths, and especially not in those kind of very specific, peculiar and niche kind of directions that it turned out we had a large overlap in. Then combined that we respected each other's work and we actually got along in terms of personality. And so the funny thing is, at that point in time, we had no plans to work together. We didn't work together at all. I didn't interview with him. He didn't interview with him. I knew him a little bit. And it's not like we talked online when I went home. No. But the next year, I went back to Korea again. I saw him more. And what had happened was we'd had one offhand conversation, when I was in Korea, where he'd said something along the lines of like he wanted to start a podcast. And he wanted to do a podcast for League of Legends where it would be like real analysis of the games, and it would be like, people who actually knew what they were talking about. Because at the time, there was a bunch of podcasts, but they were like general people who played the game casually. And there was nothing in terms of esports at the time. And like, except for Travis's stuff, which again was a bit more casual. It was like the personalities aspect. It was like friends of his and other pro players. And it was more fun. It was quite light, And so funnily enough, he'd said that, but he never mentioned me being on it. And I never brought the topic up again. I just listened to it. Oh, okay, cool idea. And then what happened was, when I was back at home, I was working for On Gamers. Because at the end of that year, I started working for On Gamers in like November, I think, of 2013. And, what was it, December? One of those two. And then the next year at On Gamers, Travis was still doing some of his shows. And he did a show called Whose Line Is It? No, it's not Whose Line Is It Anyway. Obviously not. That's actually a TV show. He did Whose League Is It Anyway? And it was a show where he had personalities on, not pros, like people from within the industry talking about esports and League of Legends. And he was missing a guest for the upcoming week. And we worked for On Gamers as partners, colleagues at the time. And he literally just said, like, oh, could you come on the show like last minute on this day? And I said, well, okay, but if I come on, what it's going to be like, right? I'm just going to be myself. And he was like, yeah, I know. And I did it. And this is unfortunately the last ever episode of Whose League Is It Anyway? And it's unfortunately the one where he deleted the VOD because he didn't like that. Unfortunately, when I went on the show, I've sometimes jokingly described it as like episode 0 of Summoning Insight, or the pilot for Summoning Insight, because the way I am on that show is the way I am on Summoning Insight. I don't just put up with any guff, and I don't just listen to nonsense. And if people just say some ridiculous opinion, I make them justify it, and I don't say, whatever, like, oh yeah, I'm just going to sit here and ignore that and then just say whatever I think. No, it's combative and it's fun and there's edgy jokes and all these things. And unfortunately, because I did that, and obviously I wasn't a fan of that show anyway, and that's why I told him I'm going to be myself. I don't like that sort of light throwaway stuff as much when I think they should be talking about serious stuff. And so unfortunately, a lot of people aligned with my way of thinking, and they were like, oh, I love the stuff Thorin did on that show, and he wrecked them all, and it just showed how they don't really follow the game that closely, and they're not that into it, which was true to some degree, but some of them were quite vicious about how they said it. And unfortunately, that upset Travis so much, and some of the people on the show, he just like deactivated the VOD. And so you can only see it now if you go and watch like a highlight video of just my highlights of the shit I said, but you can't see the rest of the show, unfortunately. And like, as I said, that was the last ever episode. And literally, while I was doing the show, at the time, having shows streaming live on Twitch was still a big deal. While the show was going on live, Monty actually messaged me on Skype, and he was literally just saying something like, haha, why are you on this show with these people, like, they're just talking nonsense. And I was just like, haha, yeah, I know, like, while they were talking, And then when I was wrecking them all, he just said something like, this is hilarious, like, let's fuck this shit, let's just start our own podcast now, let's do that idea. And so basically, after that, I came up with the idea of Summoning Insight. I came up with the name. I came up with the concept that it'd be me and Monty every episode, and we'd have guests. And in the future, sometimes we could do just 2-man episodes. I started to do it regularly for On Gamers. At the time, I had a producer who worked with me, but later I just produced it all in every respect. And so, yeah, I actually, initially, the whole point of it was to be a vehicle for Monty's analysis. And obviously, in doing so, this is another thing. What's weird about our relationship, me and Monty, is that we only really exist on the working relationship and the deep conversation relationship. We don't really have an in-between. We don't have like an everyday messaging each other or messaging on apps and stuff. Yet we are friends, and we do align on many things. We just aren't the sort of people in that sense who have the day-to-day contact. So what I found out now was that our working relationship was fantastic. We had this great on-camera chemistry, and we kind of understood each other's roles. And as I said, for me, I always understood it as a vehicle for Monty. Like, I thought this guy was the best commentator in esports at the time, definitely the best in League of Legends. I think he was way better than those fucking NALCS casters. And I couldn't stand the fact that over in Korea, he was doing it for a very specialist niche audience. Remember back then, I think at the time, yeah, you still had to be a subscriber to even listen to it. And he didn't get his due for how good he was. And he didn't get the platform for Westerners to hear his analysis. So I wanted them to be exposed to that and give this guy the ultimate chance. Give him the ball, let him go with it. And then I would provide the banter and the jokes and the entertainment to go along with a very serious analysis. And we have a show there, right? That's a duo. That can work. So, yeah, I think that was a fantastic partnership, as we later found out. And so, as a result, and by the way, to show how the friendship aspect did even in the end intersect with this, when I was fired from Ungamers, Monty actually said to me, I mean, he's never said this publicly, so I'll just reveal it now. He actually said to me, like, oh, while you're looking for another job, if you want, you can take all the profits that we make from Summoning Insight and any shows that we do together. And in fact, I've been talking to my agent and I want us to set up our own channel where it's me and you, and it's a channel just for our esports content that we do together. And we'll build that brand out. And, you know, like one day, maybe it'll be so big, it'll be a network where we can let other people come into the pact and, you know, share them with our audience. And then we share the profits with them. And it'll be where we big it up. So that's how the whole Insight and esports thing happened. That's why it's not just on my channel. And funnily enough, by the way, I never did take any of the money that was his share. In fact, I mean, I'll maybe get into this another day, but we never actually took any of the money out. And we never did it for money. It was never about money and hits and views. It was about this fun working relationship and getting to do work that we thought was meaningful and having a vehicle for Monty to build his brand to some degree. And that's why when I do Oversight now, to me, nothing's changed. I realize to the League of Legends audience, it sucks for them. They don't get to watch Summoning Insight. To me, I'm basically doing Summoning Insight. I'm doing it for Overwatch. It's called Oversight. It's me and Monty again. He's the expert again. I'm right back at the square one. I don't know anything about the game again. I'm having to do my banter and entertainment element, and I have the guests, and I try and work with the guests, and I book the guests. But to me, I still get to work with Monty. It still fills the same need. It's still the same amount of fun. I love doing it. I'm looking forward to doing it in the future. And so, yeah, I do see a longer future with us, especially I think if we ever get sponsorship involved with that channel and those shows, I could see our shows getting huge because I think the kind of chemistry we have, there's not many people in any form of like sports media or general media that have such a good mixture of entertainment, showmanship, knowledge, experience, and then a good natural chemistry where we can work off each other, and we're veterans in that respect. So I think it's a natural, bizarrely, it was entirely through synchronicity, but in the end, the happenstance ended up, forming a friendship, forming a great working relationship.
Being as you are someone who started off in different games than perhaps you work in now, you've gone through so many over the years, you've shifted from scene to scene. What is the thought process behind shifting games? Is it set that you're just going to work with a certain amount of games now? Will you move on to newer games when they come out? What's the philosophy behind it?
Yeah, so I mean, I've already kind of alluded to the fact that I could have shifted games before, and I have in terms of my journalism throughout the years. The big problem is I can answer this fairly simply. Like, first of all, I've got to have time to do it. Like at the moment, when all my esports that I cover are big and there's a lot going on and I'm very invested, I'm doing a lot of work, I don't have as much time to invest in a new esports. Secondly, there's got to be a hook. Now, what I've learned over the years from League of Legends to CSGO is the hook doesn't have to be the game being fun. I don't have to like to play the game. I don't have to be that interested, but it has to have a big scene, or it has to have some compelling figures that I want to follow in it, or here's another detail, the scene has to be receptive to my work. If they're totally against it and they just downvote it or whatever, yeah, I'm probably not going to put that heavily in terms of how I balance out my work. I might still do some in that game if I think it's fun, like I do in Dota every now and then, but I'm never going to make that a priority because it won't be successful. It's not even worth making that a priority or a focus. I balance my output, yes, to do the things I want to do, and I will always get the things I really want to do done. I do some other things that aren't as big a deal, like some news that otherwise I could easily skip. But I balance it based on what kind of success I have, what kind of success I want to have, how much I'm making, how much I want to make. And the overarching thing is still, yes, to get the things that I want to do done. And I'm able to balance that, thankfully. But that is what will dictate whether I shift into different games or not. And so right now, no plans to really shift to any other games. But it will certainly happen. It's just a case of when and not if.
As someone who's worked in the esports industry for more than a decade and a half, why keep going? Why continue to work in this field? Why not move on to a different field? Why not try and take your skills, parlay it into journalism in a different area? Why keep going in esports?
The bizarre thing is, when someone asks me a question like that, which I understand why, when you've been involved in some of those 16, 17 years, I mean, I've been watching esports games for 20 years, then people will ask, oh, how much longer are you going to keep doing this? Oh, is there going to be a point where you retire? Or you must think about retiring or think about quitting. You know, why keep going in it? What's funny is I don't. That's actually not something I ever think about. Yeah, there were some points back in my career, like when I left ESEA in a very acrimonious fashion, I thought about maybe I should go do something else. But then, like I said, I actually found by going out into my life, I found other things that I brought back into esports that revitalized esports, made it more interesting to me. There's the fact that, you know, there was times where I got fired and I thought, is that it? Like, will I be able to get more opportunities? But I thought, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to apply myself more. I'm going to come back in a new way. I'm going to take what happened to me, the bad things of it. I'm going to cleanse those. I'm going to revamp what happened. I'm going to make it work for me. I'm even going to make it jokes in my persona built around that. And I'm going to own it in that way. And I'm going to keep pushing forwards, and I'm going to get to a better position than I did. And that's something I have always done. I might have had 5 or 6 huge setbacks in my career, and I've always overcome them. I've worked harder. I've battled beyond that, and I've won every personal battle, or those people no longer exist in esports and are no longer within my field of view and no longer matter. And therefore, it doesn't matter that I didn't win those personal battles. So I will have to say that to me, it's never why keep going. It's more like why would I stop? I mean, I have more reasons now than I ever had before to keep going. Because, I mean, I continue to grow, my work continues to grow, my opportunities continue to grow, the money continues to grow. Every factor's there to make it more and more satisfying. I'm also someone where, this might sound weird because it's very specific to me as a person, but I always wished there was communities like this when I was younger, but they didn't exist in the fields I was interested in. So in the 90s, I was very interested in cyber culture. Like, I was one of the people who, almost as soon as I found out about the internet in the early 90s, I was interested in it. I wanted to go on it. I was trying to get time. I was going places you could go on the internet. I was looking at stuff. And one of the things I got really interested in, because obviously at the time there was no esports, so the people who were brilliant, gifted, flawed, who I got interested in, first of all, were actually hackers. And I was very interested in hackers and programmers and the subculture around them. I mean, I remember one of the things that always made me feel almost wistful was when I would watch that classic movie, Hackers the movie, which I think is a fantastic fun, but obviously guilty pleasure. It's the fact that in the movie, they make it seem as though there's this like underground cyber culture of people who like hack and who were into hacking culture, and they were the nerds. And obviously that didn't exist. There were no fun, cool nightclubs where you played PlayStation games. That stuff wasn't the case. And I wished it was. I wished that could exist. And like we have in esports now, it just wasn't the case back then. So I was interested in a very, very niche thing within a niche thing. And that was it. It was just me and a few other people, and we weren't connected in any way. I wished we could have had that. So when esports came along, obviously I was interested in that. I mean, even in the early days, I was interested in multiplayer games long before esports. Like, I used to play some of those games where they were like turn-based games where you could mine asteroids in space, and then you were part of a big fleet battling, and you could make planetary alliances. I always thought that was very interesting. My favorite game on the Amiga was Frontier Elite 2, which was a game where you had a little spaceship and then you upgraded it and you could dogfight in space and you traded stuff and you went and did missions on different planets. And the key thing about this game was the missions were generated within the computer. So they weren't set. There was no rails that you were set on. You could explore the whole universe. And I'd always wished that was multiplayer. So funnily enough, if something like EVE Online had actually existed back when, you know, Ultima Online and EverQuest were, maybe I would have got sucked into that and gotten really involved in that. But instead, I discovered Quake, and Quake had some of the first multiplayer games where you could have 16 people and you could be playing an FPS game. I got really hooked on it. And then the pro scene started to come along. And I used to dream back then, like I say, of a culture. I wanted to see all the best players play at every event. And I wanted to see the best player from Sweden and from Germany and from the USA and from Canada all at the same event battle each other. I didn't want them to battle independently and have to wonder how would they do if they matched up against each other, or they played once and that guy won, so is he truly better? And it so rarely ever happened back in those late 90s times. So in esports, in fact, in Counter-Strike, it wasn't really until like 2005 that every big tournament could have the biggest teams there, the big majors. You know, if it was a North American tournament, you had to have a sponsor that could send you to North America, or you had to win a qualifier. It was in Europe, not a lot of the American teams had good sponsors. They couldn't fly there, or they wouldn't fly there, or they felt uncomfortable doing so. That's why when I discovered Brood War in like 2009 at the end, it blew my mind. This is the culture I'd wanted. All the best players live in the same city. They have truly elite competition in every single big individual league. They have competition outside of that to keep your level up. Everyone's training to the maximum with no excuses. Old legends don't just retire. They keep playing as long as they can, but get overtaken by people. I've always hated it in other games, Quake, Counter-Strike, where some legendary player retires at the top or just after the top, and you never get to see who he would have eventually lost to out of the rising talents. You never get to see the new champion really beat him a lot. Like, one of my favourite Quake players, Blue, the Rail God, he just retired and played CS after a couple of years. Never got to see him play Cooler and latter day 0-4 in Quake 3 1v1. 0-4 himself, one of the best players over the early 2000s, I never got to see him play when Cooler and those other guys, CZM, hit their absolute peaks and when they were gods later in the game. He wasn't always around back then. In Counter-Strike, Real, Trace, Ruit, for different reasons, these guys quit when they all were fantastically skilled and could have done a lot more and maybe been even greater if they'd have kept competing. But the circumstances weren't there. They didn't have the funding like Korean Brood War. They didn't have the culture and all the things surrounding it that would allow it to be like the zenith of what a sport could accomplish, which is what I found in Brood War and had liked from other cultures and other sporting components. Then there's the fact that another reason I keep going is because esports keeps getting more interesting. The more interesting I get and the more interested I am in other things about esports, which then loop back into my interest in esports. It became so that as I developed my life independent of esports, mid-2000s mainly, I began to see how all the ideas and conclusions and philosophies that I adopted from freed from those genres and limitations or boundaries could apply to esports, and that would spark a novel thought here or something different about how to model something in esports. And so ideas, or rather esports, let me think how to say this, esports became one of many prisms that I could refract an idea through and have it come out in a different way, but affected by that particular thing. And it became one of those things that I would get my ideas and push them through and see what came out the other side. And so if esports wasn't interesting enough, then that means you or I are not interesting enough or weren't interesting enough. We got to develop ourselves. I mean, I didn't actually used to use a lot of analogies, especially not a lot of sporting analogies, until maybe the 2010s, the last 7 years. And that's because I hadn't studied as many things and had so many connections made up. And so I know some people don't like that much, especially if they don't know what I'm talking about, the sport I'm talking about. They don't seem to get, it's not about that. Like, if you understand the game, you can understand on that level. The point of the analogy is to give more chances for someone to get what I'm saying. And if someone knows the game and what the realm I'm referring to, it's going to give them an even more powerful connection and an analogy and a reference point, an analog to go across from one thing to another. And so I always think of it like this. You want to get to this city. That's the conclusion. That's the point you're getting across. But to get the point, well, the other person is the city in that sense. And the idea is the thing making the journey. Now, in this particular sense, the analogies are like other roads and bridges to that city. If I only have one, the game, and that bridge is down or that road's closed, you can't get the idea to the other person. They don't understand the thing that you're trying to get across to them about the game. Now, if that's not the case, if they know about basketball and I make a point about basketball, maybe then it gets through and I get to the city and the point gets there. That's kind of the thing that I was trying to do there. But then again, I understand why some people don't get it, because I actually think it's a huge problem in society in general, in the modern world. You look at the way the modern world works with this almost like, the model a lot of people use is like the left brain prisoner who can only think in this like rational nuts and bolts way. It feels like a lot of people don't have access to that other aspect of themselves or haven't developed it to be able to even understand or interpret metaphor in the modern world.
What do you mean by a metaphor though? What is the significance of metaphor? What is the disconnect there where people aren't understanding or aren't grasping this as a concept?
Well, on the most basic level, language itself is metaphor. Like, it's symbols that represent something else, but that are not in themselves that thing. They are just referential. And then we use that symbol to play a game and interact with other things and transmit something, even though we can't always literally have the thing there itself, especially not if we're talking about or thinking about it and it's not present in itself. This is something that I really came to a lot of interesting conclusions about by studying the work of Alfred Korzybski, who I discovered through Robert Anton Wilson and his general semantics and E-prime. And it's all very interesting because yes, you can see why it appeals to the psychedelic or the Zen way of thinking about the world. Because when we have symbols and when we're using symbols within models and systems, they have to be elastic. They have to be changeable, interchangeable. We have to be able to look at them and only take them in the context they're in and then recreate them and use a different model because they have to be experienced and viewed beyond just a literal level. People get so hung up on the semantics, and that's just chasing your tail ultimately. You're just wasting your own and everyone else's time. So the idea that people are outraged by jokes, or they want a book banned, or they think a certain narrative just cannot be spoken and that's so shocking to even think. Like, to me, the whole point of these types of archetypes or truths is they are beyond literal facts and proof. I mean, I made a video on this topic. It was called something like "It Didn't Happen, But It's True." And I give this example about Steve Jobs, the movie about him, and how something in the movie happened that was actually truer to the spirit of Steve Jobs' life than what actually happened in his life. You'd have to go and watch that video, I guess, on my channel to really get what I'm saying there. But to me, the inability to understand metaphor, this is something that a lot of my psychedelic experience really brought home to me. And then the philosophy I read. If you get trapped in the semantic game, you are trapped. You are a prisoner, and you can only go as far as the limitations of that allow you to. You've got to be able to think beyond that, interpret things metaphorically, express things metaphorically, and that is the key to expressing all imagination. Because imagination is this locked away realm in your head or somewhere else. And how are you going to help someone else? Are you going to express something that unlocks something from there and communicates it to someone else and goes up into their imagination and blossoms into something special? Now, you're never going to do a perfect job of it. Now, it's never going to work seamlessly. And as a result, you've got to know that it's not. And therefore, the metaphors are very important to understand what the person meant by that and how they were trying to explain it. It's not the metaphor itself that's the more important thing. And you've got to be able to view them beyond a literal level to be able to communicate these things, because these things will never have an objective proof because they're going on inside your brain somewhere that we don't even know. Where does the idea exist? It doesn't have a physical reality. It's something ethereal within your imagination, the most mysterious place on earth. So the metaphor helps you to communicate that. And therefore, if you think about it on a literal level, you're never going to get to it. And you're always going to be trapped within these stupid little semantic games that people get involved in.
We see within your videos, over the last few years particularly, you're always making analogies to other areas, whether it's sports or movies or politics or some sort of occult concepts, or you're making videos that bring in more of your philosophy and experiences and things of this nature, even if it's still within the realm of esports. Then we see you've made the second channel, the Thorin Side channel, and now you're producing videos that have nothing to do with esports. Will you ever move outside of esports? Do you think that in the future the Thorin's channel could be purely about esports? It could be a scenario where you just move into doing some work in another area that's not about esports but with a similar skill set?
Yeah, so I mean, beyond the idea of like stopping esports, people, they wonder, like, why don't I move outside of esports? I mean, I've had opportunity, I've done TV work, I've done a lot of work where people have, like I said, talked to me about doing books or doing separate things. Now, the big problem again is, why would I? Like, the key thing that I've learned about what I'm doing in terms of how I engage esports is it has become a vehicle to literally do anything I want to do. Now, I actually was able to reflect on this and articulate it that way through a story I heard, an anecdote from the guys who made South Park, Trey Parker, Matt Stone, which is that supposedly, okay, if you remember the early seasons of South Park, it wasn't that great a show. It was all right. It was vaguely funny, but it was very much like moralistic stories, and every story would be like a key thing about like the interaction between the children and what they did in their lives. It was a very different show than it is now. And what they did was they went away and they made, obviously, Team America World Police, which was a really fun movie. But if you remember, it was done with puppetry. And the story I heard, whether I might have misremembered it and made it better in my head, I'm not sure, was that because that was a puppet movie, and it's a nightmare to make. Like, the way you make that movie is you move the arm a tiny bit, you take a shot, you go back, you move it a tiny bit, and you have to do that. It's mega detailed, and it's so difficult to make, that afterwards, what they thought to themselves was, that was fun, but it was a nightmare to make that movie. Why make another movie? Or why make movies in general that are so hard to make and to get through and that you don't have elements of control over the same way you do in TV, when we've got this TV show? On this TV show, we can do almost anything we want. We can say anything we want. We have full creative control. We can make the characters do and say anything they want. So why don't we just make South Park, instead of the TV show about these kids in the city they live in, let's make it a vehicle to talk about any topic and to make any point and explore any idea we want to anywhere, but it'll just be within this cartoon. And so that's what they did. And that's why the shows became topical. And they became about things that are other, and they changed the characters' identities and personalities to make them fit what they wanted to tell. And that's basically what I've been able to do in esports, is become a vehicle for what I want to express. And I can tell you, quite frankly, I've been able to live out my dreams through esports. I remember when I started watching Brood War, like I said, end of 2009. That was long before I was independent. That was long before I had enough money to move anywhere, or had the opportunity to, or even knew how you could. Since then, and I used to watch it and think, oh, imagine being in the Korean scene, but I'm never going to be involved in Brood War, am I? And I'd never be able to be a commentator in that game. There's no way to do it. Since then, I have lived in Korea. I have spent over a year of my life in Korea, living there, dating Korean girls, seeing Korean culture, having Korean food, coming and going as I please. It was fantastic. all because of how I shaped my esports career and the vehicle it became and where I got it to. I've been on TV in America and lived there with a work visa that says I have extraordinary ability that the US country needs to have imported. Like, these things would never have been possible before, or perhaps if I went into another area. I mean, I plan to move this year somewhere where I'm going to live a different life entirely and be more suited to doing the type of work I want to do while still doing some elements of the others that I'll balance out. And again, this is all possible because I have a job where I can do it anytime on the internet with stuff I can carry with me. And this is how fantastic this vehicle's become for me and how rich and rewarding it is. I've obviously, as people have seen, I've made a second channel. I've expanded. I can now do work that has nothing to do with esports if I want. I mean, do it for fun at the moment. I support myself from the esports work, but maybe one day that can blossom into something. Ultimately, thanks to esports and where it is right now, where my skill set is, and the fact I keep working on it, I can choose how much to work. I can choose how much to travel. I can choose how much to earn. If I want to take time off, if I don't want to work as much in one area that's very fruitful and lucrative, but I don't enjoy it as much, I can do it in another area, earn a bit less, do less. But if I really want to earn more, I could just say, cut a bunch of this from my schedule, do more of these events, get more of this work over here, do less of these events over here, and do this type of work. I have all these options. It's fantastic at the moment. And so the fact that I can reach so many people, the fact that so many people are interested in this stuff and the channel size has gotten so big, that's even allowing me opportunities outside of esports. I just did an interview, which, I mean, it might have been published by the time you see this or not, with a guy called David Kushner. Now, anyone who's listening to this doesn't know who that is. He's a guy where he wrote a book called Masters of Doom, outlining the atmosphere and the ideas and the philosophy behind id Software when they made Quake and Doom. And what's funny is I've obviously always been interested in that. I read that book many years ago. I thought it was a fantastic book. And what I did was I recommended this book to someone fairly recently. And after I did that, I just randomly thought, I wonder if he did any other books about gaming. So I Googled his name and I found his Twitter profile. And when I clicked on his Twitter profile, he doesn't follow tons of people, but it said follows you. So I followed him back. I messaged him, said, you want to do an interview? I did an interview about this exact topic. It's not that much about esports. It's about Quake and Doom and what was going on behind the scenes. And I literally had the reach to be able to get to this guy, talk to him, do an interview about all this and ask exactly the things I was curious about. That's all come thanks to esports and where my media skills have taken me in that particular respect. So I could see a future in that where I can reach out to more people I'm interested in. I can do more content outside esports while simultaneously doing it in esports. Because I have kind of come to the conclusion, at least at this point, like I feel like I could be someone who could be in esports my whole life. Like I remember when I read Phil Jackson's book where he talks about the concept of books rather of a lifer in basketball. They're the people who are going to be a player and a coach and work in the front office, and they're just going to be in basketball their whole life. And he never thought he was going to be one. He thought he might retire after being the coach of the Bulls in the 90s. He thought he might retire after he left the Lakers after 2004. He thought he might be totally done after he left the Lakers with his second go-around where they won the back-to-back. Now he's in the front office at the Knicks. He eventually came to the conclusion that maybe he is a lifer. Maybe his life and his experiences through basketball mean that'll always be a vehicle for him. There's obviously, I mean, again, because I came from this background where I loved programming, I always loved the story. And funny enough, not only is the movie Hackers good, but there's a book that has nothing to do with the movie Hackers, but it's called Hackers by Stephen Levy. It's a fantastic book. And it's about the history of programming and the brilliant minds that shaped a lot of computer culture. And when he writes about like the classics of the 70s, the guys, Bill Gosper, Richard Greenblatt, these expert hackers who are really unique guys who are working on the PDP computers in MIT and at Caltech and all this sort of stuff. When he writes about all that, this culture, that sounds fantastic when you're reading it, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to be a programmer. When he gets towards the end of the book, he tells the story of Richard Stallman. And Richard Stallman's the guy behind GNU, which eventually, all those pieces, when Linus Torvalds put in the kernel, became Linux, essentially, became a very important alternative operating system that a lot of the world's businesses run on because it's so high performance and so efficient. And so, and crucially open source. And so, not only were Richard Stallman's ideas interesting, but he was there at the end of the era of all the hackers, which meant programmers back in the day, at MIT, etc. And he was the last real one left when everyone else was just doing courses. And he was the one that hadn't gone and gotten a job. And that kind of nostalgia for the golden age that he felt, where he felt like he'd just missed it and he was the last true hacker, I was into that. So the idea of being a lifer in that way, well, I'm like the guy where I was like him. I started in esports and it's like I'd missed esports. Esports had been a few years before and it was never going to get bigger. And in fact, because of the dot-com bubble crash, it was over already and I'd arrived and it was too late. But then you know what? Unlike him, I got this amazing experience where it gradually built up again. And now it got bigger than it ever was. And now I'm in a position that's better than I ever was. And I can do almost anything. I mean, at this point, I'm a part of esports as much as esports is a part of me. We have a symbiotic relationship. We have been so significant to each other's histories and lives, and people have come and gone for both of us, but we have both remained constant.
Hi, this is Gertrude and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
What up guys, this is Jordan Nelson Gilbert and I'm...
Hello guys, this is Gabriel Fallen, player from SK Gaming.
Salut les gars, c'est Shox de G2.
Hey guys, this is Spencer Rico Martin.
We work with some of the world's top pros to teach you how to take your game to the next level with constantly updated training content. When you're done watching and want to train or warm up, just a few clicks will put you in your favorite training mods like Deathmatch. But why warm up for a match on Mirage by getting shot in the back on Dust 2? That's why we built Duels. Real fights on real maps. 1 minute in Duels is like 20 rounds of real CS. The best way to train and warm up. Exclusively available on Boomio.com.